welcome to the special board meeting this Monday, August 10th. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Could I have someone approve the agenda? Show of hands. Trustee Forbes and Trustee Thatcher would second it. All in favor? And do we have any declarations of interest this evening? Seeing none, we'll move forward to the report from the committee of whole in camera. I'll call on Trustee Lundquist to report of our in camera committee of the whole. Trustee Lundquist, are you there?
I'm here. I'm having a hard time hearing, but I'm here.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, you might have to repeat that. Maybe she didn't hear.
Yeah, thank you, Patrice. So, Nikki, could you report, do report from the committee whole in camera? You're on mute.
I know I'm having a really hard time hearing. I don't know why. I think your lips said something about report from the committee of the whole in camera.
You read correct.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Now, sorry, I can't hear. I'm gonna try to disconnect as soon as I do this then and see if I can't get back in on a better line somehow. The board approved the actions of the committee of the whole in camera and discussed administrative transfers and placements. There were no declarations of interest. The acting associate director of academic will bring forward information regarding administrative transfers and promotions if appropriate. Chris Brainy, this is my report.
And you move that, Trustee Lundquist. Could I have Trustee Noble? Could you second that? Thank you. All in favor? Perfect. We move on to our presentations. First one, return to school update. I'll turn it over to Acting Director Marsh.
Thank you, through you, Chair Brainy. I appreciate this opportunity to update trustees since our last public meeting in terms of the return to school planning that staff have been doing. We recognize that this is an extremely challenging time for our families as well as staff, and so tonight's presentation is going to be very detailed to you, much more detailed than the one that we did in early July in terms of the direction from the Ministry of Education at that time. What I would ask, if it's okay with trustees, because there's great intersection between all areas of the presentation that will occur this evening, we'll work our way through the staff presentation and then take questions at the end. I think given the length of the presentation, it may be the most efficient way of working our way through and really appreciate the opportunity to provide this information to you in such a granular fashion. It's not our normal presentation mode to you in terms of the amount of detail we'll be providing. However, given that this is such an unusual time, we really did want to err on the side of more information rather than less for you. So if we could, we'll start with just walking you through a little bit of the update in terms of what we'll be covering this evening. The first is we'll certainly start with the context of what we have learned from the Ministry of Education. We'll then talk about our response to the direction from the Ministry of Education in terms of our activities. We'll review the guiding principles that have informed our decision-making and program planning to date. We're going to spend a lot of time, and more time than we did in July, walking you through the health and safety protocols that we have created thus far in consultation with Durham Region Department of Health. We'll then go to school programming, where we'll provide explicit detail in terms of what the different timetables look like and profile the in-person learning as well as the launch of DDSB at home, the virtual learning environment. We'll then turn it over to Superintendent McCauley for Inclusive Student Services, where we provide information in terms of the support, understanding that this transition period for all students will be challenging, but want to make sure that in terms of students with special education needs, that the supports that they depend upon will be in place and ready for them. We'll then transition to mental health and well-being, understanding that our families and our students have been through a lot during this pandemic, and that the return to school will require additional emphasis on ensuring well-being and mental health needs are proactively addressed in a healthy manner. We'll then go into the COVID-19 specific protocols that we've developed thus far, understanding that there may be more to come in terms of that from Ontario Public Health. And then finally talk about the release of the Ministry B memos in terms of funding. So it's a lengthy presentation, and I'll go ahead and get started on it with the next slide. So as far as context, June 19th, as you know, we received the first initial planning memo from the Ministry of Education. We met in July and spoke with you in terms of the details of that memo. And then we proceeded to plan from June 19th to July 30th in terms of the direction of that memo. July 30th, a follow-up memo was received by the board. And in that memo, there was certainly some new information and new direction for us, which impacted the planning that we had been done. And namely, it was that elementary would be a full return of all students every day. And that for secondary, there were some identified boards, Durham was one of them, that would return in an adapted mode. And that meant that students would be attending every second day instead of every day. They identified that some areas of the province were identified as adapted at secondary because of the community transmission still occurring, the Ministry of Education. And I'll note that that has been a topic of conversation between us and the Ministry of Education, given that some of our schools and the geography of our district, some areas have not necessarily seen the same community transmission as other areas. They also identified in this memo that parents would have a choice, families would have a choice in terms of whether or not their child returned to the in-person school or the virtual school. But that in terms of virtual learning, parents could expect and boards needed to plan for a full day of learning for students. They also talked about in terms of that virtual school, understanding that because it would mean a restaffing and retimetabling for districts, that it would not necessarily be fluid between choosing online and then wanting to go back to in-person or vice versa. They recognized that there were limitations because they were requesting or directing a full day of learning, that it did mean that we had to restaff based on the virtual requests that we receive. So our response to that on July 30th, we communicated with our families and staff upon receiving the direction from the Ministry of Education. And the next day we launched our Return to School website and frequently asked questions. So we had determined what some of those frequently asked questions might be, and there were already questions coming in. And so we launched those the day after the Ministry of Education gave us the direction. And we also identified in our email to parents the opportunity for them to choose the at-home virtual learning. And on the July 31st, we launched the registration for the virtual school, wanting to provide parents the largest window feasible in terms of an opportunity to register for that school. It closes this Wednesday. We have continued to update the information as it becomes available from the Ministry of Education. And so post August 12th, that is when we will then start to retimetable and restaff all of our schools. On August 4th, the Ministry of Education met with Durham District School Board staff to review all of our health and safety protocols as well as our schedule planning. And so until we had that meeting, we did not release details. We'd only released samples and drafts at that stage. But after August 4th, we then communicated again with families in terms of what we were looking at as far as the scheduling and more information in terms of health and safety protocols. On August 5th, the Ministry of Education released its finance memos, and I think it's going to be really important. We'll conclude. I think it's one of our last slides in terms of the financial memos, because there are some logistical criteria. It's not that the board is necessarily just getting a transfer payment from the Ministry of Education. And so we will, Interim Associate Director of Corporate Services, Pisco, will walk you through some of the requirements that the ministry has laid out in terms of the financial expectations. Still waiting from the Ministry of Education policy direction in terms of virtual learning. We learned last Monday that there was going to be a memo on requirements within the virtual learning environment. And so we're still waiting for that information. We will have to plan and adapt our planning in terms of what is in that memo when it is released. So that's sort of the context of where we've been in the last few weeks. August 10th, we will be appointing the principals for the DDSB Learn at Home school. So starting with the principals for those schools, understanding that it's really important that as families transition, and it is high demand as far as the Learn at Home program, we want to provide a very rigorous program, and you'll hear more about our planning in terms of what that will feel like for students and what they'll experience. But tomorrow we will be announcing the principals both at the elementary and secondary level. And then from August 13th to 21st, we will undertake a re-timetabling and restaffing process based on enrollment changes. So if a student enrolls for the virtual school, we'll have to take all of those students and use current existing staff to staff that school, which will mean a reduction in the number of educators within a school building because their enrollment will have gone down. And so that will apply to all staff. Our intention is to staff the virtual school with the same sorts of resources that students would have access to in the physical building. It will also mean that we need to adjust our vice principals in terms of enrollment numbers, and some vice principals will be transferred to provide additional support. So all of that will happen in the next two weeks. We will then confirm timetables with families, in particular at the secondary level, and we'll walk through tonight a little bit of the conversation in terms of programming, what will be available in the virtual school, because we recognize that not every subject can be replicated in a way that is meaningful in DDSB Learn at Home. And so we will have a look at what we think the parameters are, and so confirm timetables with families before returning, with students before they return in September. August 25th, our goal is to be able to identify to the board any large class cohorts at elementary. We have, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the presentation, we've mapped out based on the Sick Kids report of 1 meter between students, the capacity of all of our physical classrooms, and we'll then want to report to you any classrooms that are above and beyond that to draw it to your attention. It should be noted that when we're thinking about timetabling, there is an opportunity when we're building larger schools like the Virtual Academy, that it does provide an opportunity for some efficiencies in staffing. And so if there are efficiencies in staffing from the virtual school, we could then potentially apply those to our largest classes that are in person at the elementary level. We're also, of course, looking at other opportunities in terms of centrally appointed staff and where it makes sense potentially to reassign educators for cohorts that we're concerned about. So that very quickly is the timeline of what we're looking at as far as next steps. And what I think I'd like to do now is just to turn it over to our Interim Executive Officer of Communications, to just very briefly highlight for you the website and the resources on the website, given that we will be referencing all of the information we're referencing this evening is available on the website. And so just want to share that so that you see its accessibility. And obviously we'll be happy to take feedback and questions on that as well at the conclusion of the presentation this evening. So Rob, turn it over to you.
Good evening, trustees. I'll be providing a brief overview of the DDSB Returning to School website, which is intended to carry a lot of information with respect to the return to school as a kind of a one-stop shop, so to say. On the page itself, families will be able to access our most updated version of frequently asked questions. We have currently the draft return to school guide, and once that guide is completely finalized, it will be updated on the page itself, including additional resources such as well-being resources and supports and resources for families and youth. This page is not going to be a static page. It will be constantly updating over the course to the start of the school year, but also beyond as the school year starts, as a landing page for families to provide them information specific to COVID-19, the return to school, and what is happening. And this supplements communication from school principals to families at the school level as well. An overview is provided of the school day, which also includes sample timetables, which you'll be seeing later on in this presentation, that you'll be able to find under elementary, secondary, remote learning, and also the details right now about how to opt out of in-person learning and choose to learn remotely from home through what we'll be launching very shortly, the DDSB at Home virtual learning platform. We also will have important information around how to stay safe and healthy. This is an overview of the health and safety protocols that have been created as a very quick resource for families to see what is happening. And again, as we confirm additional information, that will be provided on there. Finally, we'll be also providing information on COVID-19 protocols. That's what's there right now. Around contact tracing, what happens if a student feels sick at school, and also what happens if somebody is confirmed with COVID-19. As Nora mentioned, we're waiting on additional information from Public Health Ontario, and once we do receive that, it will be there. So this is again meant to be a one-stop shop as an overview of the return to school planning and throughout the school year as well.
Thank you. And so in terms of understanding that this is an evolving situation, we will flag when things are new. We'll identify, we'll mark them as new so that families will know if they're reading it on a regular basis, where to focus their attention in terms of new information. So moving forward, we're going to get now into the planning process, and I think it's appropriate to begin with the principles that we remind ourselves before every planning session. As you know, we have committed, as soon as we went into distance learning, we talked about the importance of human rights being at the center of all of our decision making and thinking, and that has not changed in terms of our planning for the return to school of our students. Certainly also thinking in terms of health and safety protocols and the partnership with Durham Health, and taking their health guidance in terms of anything they have to offer us in terms of insight of how we can ensure a safe learning environment for students and staff. Providing quality instruction and a focus on mental health and well-being are not new to the Durham District School Board, but they continue to be our explicit commitment to our school community. And we recognize that from March to June, there were very challenging situations, both for staff and families. We do know that as we enter into this new return to school, there is opportunity now for us to have planned. There's opportunity in terms of students being in school as far as childcare for our staff. And we believe that we're going to offer an extremely robust program, whether it's in person or in learn at home. We understand the need for flexibility, and so whenever possible, we will be looking at situations on a case-by-case basis. And I think we've had to adapt our planning quite a bit in terms of the June memo and the July memo, and recognize that as the situation evolves, we will continue to need to adapt. doing our very best to meet the needs of all families within the district. Of course, the requirement is that we do meet the direction of the Ministry of Education in terms of their memos to us, as well as respecting our responsibilities within the collective agreements that are provincially negotiated, but that we hold with our staff. And certainly the final principle is ongoing communications with stakeholders, and that will only become more important during the return to work period or return to school period, because we recognize that families will want to make sure that they have up-to-date information as far as what's happening in the school. And so certainly that is something that we're aware of, and we're planning for regular communications. We've had a lot of questions in terms of if someone is diagnosed, for example, positively with COVID-19, and we will be transparent and we will communicate as quickly as we can in terms of factual information. So we recognize communications will continue to be an emphasis as we move forward to return to school. So with that background information, I'm very happy to now turn it over, and we will get right away into the health and safety expectations. Thank you.
Good evening. It's Carla speaking, and I don't know whether or not I can get my video to turn on. So if you don't mind, I'll just I'll go forward in this way, and it's probably better. It makes it less unstable in terms of video. With respect to health and safety, there's many aspects in our plan that speak to the health and safety components for schools, as well as our central department. With respect to students and medical masks and masks generally, the ministry made it very clear that the mask policy would be mandatory for students in grades 4 to 12, where they are to wear a non-medical mask or a cloth mask when indoors. But of course, the reprieve comes when they're outside of in the fresh air. Students in kindergarten to grade 3, of course, are not required to wear masks. However, it is encouraged that masks be worn by all students and by all staff as where possible. With respect to staff, medical masks and eye protection will be made available to all teachers and other staff. As we speak, our purchasing department is working through how best to bundle the requirements, the protective gear that will be provided, the masks and the eye shield or the face shields, figuring out how to bundle that so that teachers are able to, and school-based staff are able to pick up a full month's supply on their very first day. Masks, shields, signs, posters, sanitizers, etc., will all be provided and be available at the school before the start of the first day. I did also want to mention that there are workplace inspection teams that will be going through our facilities before the start of the school year to identify and to confirm that all the protocols and all the signage and equipment, etc., is in place. With respect to daily screening, the expectation is that all staff undertake daily screening, and for students, it is the requirement of all parents or guardians to make sure that screening is taking place for their children before they send them off to school. It's a joint responsibility to ensure that everyone is screened and before they come in, and that they're well enough to come in to learn. The next, this is a sign. We're just demonstrating or reflecting a sign that would be posted in our schools. This is the screening questions that would be asked, and you've seen this sign in probably many other public places. This is a sign again that is used throughout, and I believe it was provided to us by Durham Regional Health Department as an adequate sign to use. So these will be posted at the doors of entrance doors of all of our buildings. With respect to our cleaning enhancements and disinfection, again, Durham Regional Health Department has reviewed and supported our protocols. What this entails is that all high touch points will be cleaned twice daily. And of course, extra cleaning and disinfection will occur at the end of the day and between the change of cohorts or changes of use of the classroom. In other words, between childcare to regular school for the day, or if we get into evening classes, again, the cohort changes will need to have cleaning and disinfection occurring as cohorts change, and that we're building that into the schedule. Soft surfaces will be removed. Those are the kinds of items that it's recommended to have removed, packed away, and that is happening over the summer. So again, to the extent possible, our custodian staff are in schools doing this, setting up schools, making them ready for the end of August when our administrators will be back. On hand sanitizing and respiratory etiquette, there will be postage signs in various locations throughout the school as reminders. There's training sessions that will also be provided where children will be educated on how to properly wash your hands and address any cough or sneeze into your elbow, avoid touching the mouth and the eyes and nose. Again, signage and through program and training sessions, this is the way that we're hoping to ensure that everybody in the building understands the requirements in this regard. Signage and traffic flow, again, trying to minimize intersection points between kids and staff. So to the extent possible, there's going to be directional signage throughout the building. What we're trying to do also in stairwells is, if possible, have one set that goes up and another set that is used to go down. And again, trying to keep the traffic flow one way as much as possible. We are trying to discourage any non-employees of the DDSB from just dropping in or attending. So there's restrictions on any unscheduled visits. We're trying to encourage through signage again that appointments must be made before you just show up and expect to see anybody in the office. So unscheduled visitors and family members of children are being encouraged to phone, schedule an appointment, and or have their issues addressed over a telephone meeting. Classroom setup, I spoke to a minute ago with respect to our custodian staff are busy doing just this, and that is setting up over the summer months, separating desks and tables so that there is a 1 meter distance between desks. Fortunately, we've been able to manage with respect to ensuring that we can get 25 desks in space 1 meter apart in most of our classroom spaces. What we also have to recognize is that the opportunity to make your spaces as clutter-free as possible is what custodians are also doing. So they are boxing things that were left unboxed, all loose items. They're putting paper, plastic sheets over bookcases, etc. And this allows them also to be able to go through and do that cleaning and disinfection with every change of cohort in a more easy way than when things are scattered throughout the classroom. So we're trying to keep it as clutter-free as possible, and the distance, as you can see in the photo. With respect to ventilation, a very important issue is ventilation, and our maintenance staff are making changes to our air exchange handlers to set the handlers so that they in fact maximize the outside air that is coming in and being circulated in the building. It's happening more frequently, so a full air exchange will take place in a building every day, and when it's unoccupied, certainly in the fall. Windows, where possible, are being reviewed to be opened, and in order to promote the external fresh outside air coming in. And again, our maintenance folks are looking at repairing some of the windows that were broken, but they have the ability and the functionality to open. So they're going through and doing that. where opening windows is not possible again, it's through the fresh air exchange handler that those adjustments are being made to increase the amount of outside air in. Shared space, I spoke to this very briefly, and that is when changes are happening, the use of the room is shifting from childcare to a regular classroom, or from a regular classroom into a night class. We are going to need cleaning staff to go in and disinfect when that does happen. Similarly, health rooms and clinical rooms, as they're used, they have to be deep cleaned and disinfected before they're used again. Lunches will happen in classroom. Cafeterias and auditoriums will not be open for use. Our drinking fountains, for the most part, are taped off, but water, the water bottle refilling component of a fountain will be available and encouraged to be used. We're asking students to bring in their own refillable container so that water can be refilled through the day. But anything that students bring in, any lunches and any of the waste that comes with the lunches would have to be brought home as well. So we're asking for families to recognize that boomerang lunches are what we're trying to encourage, and very much discouraging any food sharing. We should also mention that we're looking at increasing our supervision over the lunch hours so that children are being well monitored for this food sharing and close contact not to happen during that time. The COVID procedures, this of course is when in fact there is anyone that falls ill during the day. A health room will be identified for every single school, and parent and guardian will be contacted, or guardian will be contacted immediately for pickup. There is a COVID PPE kit that will be in that room and available and to be used by the staff that are supervising the student in the room. And of course, we will be taking our direction from Durham Public Health for any illness that does occur, and particularly if it's a suspected COVID illness that seems to be presenting. I'll turn it over to you, Nora.
Thank you. So we'll keep going through, and I'm going to turn it over to, I believe it's the Acting Associate Director of Academic Services next, Markowski. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Director Marsh. I will begin our conversation during the presentation here regarding program considerations. So based on the July 30th announcement from the Government of Ontario, as Acting Director Marsh had mentioned, direction has been provided to school boards to open all elementary schools for in-person delivery of teaching and instruction 5 days a week. As well, parents have been given the option to opt their children out of in-person learning, which we responded by sending out a survey to all families asking them to indicate their preference. We'll be speaking to the DDSB at home structure in the upcoming slides as well. Based on the Education Act requirements, what I wanted to speak to first here is our elementary schedule, which will consist of 300 instructional minutes daily, which is what has been in place for students and families even prior to the pandemic. The morning will consist of 150 instructional minutes, and the afternoon will also have 150 instructional minutes. The sample timetable that we provided here uses 30-minute periods. However, some schools may choose to introduce different length periods, but will still adhere to the 150 instructional minutes in each half of the day. Recess and lunch breaks will be staggered to reduce the mixing of cohorts, and bell times for each school will be driven by transportation routing, which will be communicated to schools in the upcoming weeks. For secondary, we could just flip the slide. Thank you. For secondary schools, a staged approach to reopening was announced, with some boards designated to use an adapted model with class cohorts of approximately 15 students, utilizing alternating schedules. And as was noted earlier, the Durham District School Board was listed as one of the designated boards in Ontario. The secondary model will utilize a quadmester structure, where students will be working towards the completion of 2 credits every 45 instructional days, and as a result, the school year will be divided into 4 equal quadmesters. Each week will be a cycle where the first cohort, or cohort A, attends on Mondays and Wednesdays, and the second cohort, cohort B, will attend on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then each cohort will attend on alternating Fridays. The school day is broken down into 2 distinct components, which I will speak to. First of all, in the morning, the cohort attending in person will receive 150 minutes of in-class instruction, while the other cohort, which is at home at this time, will be accessing learning through independent tasks. This flips each day as students attend in person on alternating days. Each week during the morning, the in-person cohort will have access to both their period 1 and period 2 class as they work through the weekly cycle. Once the morning is complete, there's a 75 to 90-minute block that's introduced in the middle of the day to allow for in-person students to be dismissed, travel home, and eat their lunch. And at which point then that takes us to the afternoon. All students from both cohorts will be engaged in learning at home in the afternoon. The afternoon begins with a 75-minute block where all students receive real-time instruction from either their period 1 or period 2 teacher. This switches day to day based on the cycle. Afterwards, the day ends with another 75-minute block dedicated to study hall, which is introduced here so students can access subject-specific teachers for academic support and also engage in flex time learning. And this would ultimately take us to the full end of an instructional day for secondary, and very similar to elementary, start times for secondary schools will be dependent on transportation routing. Just flip the slide. So our virtual secondary school model will mirror the current adaptive model for secondary. This would allow us to minimize the disruption to learning if a student or staff were required to transition between the models. And you will notice an identical structure to the quadmester, except here the entire 300 minutes of the instructional day will take place through remote learning at home. Just flip for one more. And finally, here, in the event that we were informed by the Ministry of Education that we were no longer a designated board and can move to everyday instruction for students at the secondary level, we've also provided a conventional timetable for secondary students that mirrors the adaptive model and would allow for an easy transition that minimizes the disruption of learning for students. In this model, you'll notice that we would follow the exact similar quadmester structure. However, the cohorting of students is removed and all students would attend in person all their classes during the morning for 150 minutes. The remainder of the day is structured identical to the adaptive model. And at this point, what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Superintendent Nevels, who will discuss programming guidelines for both elementary and secondary schools.
Thank you. We're planning for a return with the utmost of care and caution, and we'll adapt and hopefully relax guidelines as we receive further direction from the Ministry of Education and Public Health. In terms of field trips, we're asking educators not to plan field trips at the beginning of the school year. For shared equipment, we're asking that shared equipment be avoided where possible. And if equipment must be shared, we ask that it's cleaned or disinfected in between use. And if at all possible, students are given the option to alternate. So groups of students use specific equipment. Once that's done, another group of students could use it once it has been disinfected. With assignments, we're asking that assignments be submitted online as much as possible, and any required in-person assignments be limited, but also follow health department guidelines. During breaks and recesses, we're asking that students remain within their cohort and limit interactions with other cohorts, although this can be relaxed a little bit when we're outside and also practicing social distancing. And in the beginning, no extracurricular activities will be running to minimize the mixing of cohorts. And again, as guidelines progress, we hope to be able to relax this and go back to extracurricular activities as normal. For both elementary and secondary, as you'll see in the next slide, all subjects will be taught following the guidelines mentioned previously in terms of social distancing, cohorting, and disinfecting and cleaning. We have detailed guidelines for each subject area for both elementary and secondary that we will be sharing with educators. I will go through a few within each of the panels this evening. Visual arts, as mentioned, will use single-use materials, and students will not be sharing materials. So we'll ask that educators, where possible, create packages of work and materials for students to use. That is just for their own personal use. Within secondary, on the next slide, similar to elementary, in music, we're asking that no non-vocal or non-wind instrumental performance happen within the classroom within the beginning until guidelines are a little bit more relaxed for us. In secondary, the performance activities for instrumental and vocal music could still continue online in the beginning until we have further direction. Within our next slide, both in elementary and secondary, we'll have specific guidelines for physical and health education, where preference is given for taking students outside, where at all possible for them to engage in those physical activities. There's specific guidelines for weight rooms, and we'll also ask the gymnasium doors be open to for any physical activities that are happening within the gymnasium. The Science Teachers Association of Ontario has been putting out some specific guidelines for science classrooms, and we still have training going on this week. And all of those procedures and guidelines will be shared with staff in the coming weeks. And on the final slides, in terms of technology, we have a team coming together this week to pull guidelines from industry standards to be able to share those with staff. It's promising to note that within each of those standard technology education courses, the industries have come up with guidelines as well to support us within the school. And we are hoping that co-op and work education can continue as normal following the guidelines that would take place within those places of work and any of the guidelines mentioned before. I think they pass things over to Superintendent Davis at this point.
Okay, thank you. And I'm pleased to share with you our information about our DDSB at home, our virtual learning at home. And as Acting Director Marsh stated, we're guided by the principles of human rights, equity, mental health, and well-being. We had sent out the survey to get the information, and based on our current data that we've received, we have approximately 6,000 elementary and 1,600 secondary students who have, and families who would like to engage and opt out and opt into the DDSB at home virtual learning. So this means that around 10% of our population we will be working with, and that's as of today. But we do recognize that the deadline is August 12th, so more numbers will be coming in. So in terms of the lessons learned from our modified programming, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, we have taken those lessons learned for modified programming, our summer learning, our distance learning, and we're using that information to plan forward. For example, our access to educators, we've learned through the learning that, and we will show you in a sample schedule later, that it needs to involve a balance of interactive learning with the educator, group learning, and independent learning as well. So moving on to the second slide, this is our planning timelines. You've gotten information around the planning timelines at the beginning of this presentation. So I will just point out just a few things that are specific to the DDSB at home. And one of them is that we're confirming the numbers this week, and the detailed planning will begin immediately. It already has begun, but we're looking for the numbers to go into detail. And with the numbers, we'll be able to flesh out roles, responsibilities, curriculum, staffing, and those pieces. Also, in the week of August 24th, we will be building and sharing timetables, class placements with families, so that we can respond to questions, and students will have the opportunity to confirm specifically their first semester courses from selections that are available. And then on September 8th will be our first day of virtual learning DDSB at home. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a sample schedule for the day. Do keep in mind that it indicates that the day is divided into activities which include interactive real-time learning with the teacher, group work, independent work. However, we've been asked questions about the samples, so we wanted to put a sample here. A major consideration in the sample is the age and stage of the student. So that means younger students will have more transition and we'll be balancing those pieces depending on the age and the stage of the student. So the next slide is a sample of a secondary schedule. And this you've already seen a sample before because it mirrors the in-person. The difference is that this is online. So in terms of our virtual learning, we are taking the numbers that we are getting from the opting out of in-person and into DDSB at home. And we are using this information to plan forward, which will begin immediately. So the student registration and the families who are opting to participate in DDSB at home will determine staffing, grades, class sizes, programs available, and professional development for our staff. So, and the specific details of the timelines that I've shared with you will also be adjusted because we are anticipating the Ministry of Education policy and program memorandum that will come on virtual learning, and that will inform our detailed plan. We're also, the work that we're doing is also based on professional learning and constant feedback with our stakeholders and work with our associations. So we count on having that consistent feedback and maintaining that connection between the DDSB at home virtual school and the home school during our planning. Thank you.
Good evening. The Durham District School Board is committed to supporting inclusive programming with a range of services and programs for our students with special education needs. Our classroom educators are core to each student's program, working with families and other supports at the school, district, and community levels, of which a number are listed on screen. Additional ministry funding provided for the 2021 school year is being used to increase staff working directly with our students. For example, our educational assistants and our mental health professionals. A nominal amount of funding is also being used to mitigate the sharing of resources, such as our sensory tools. Program amendments specific to supporting in-school and learn-at-home learning includes revisioning of our academic resource rooms and taking forward the learning from summer school and our virtual learning hubs. For students in regular class placements, their individualized programming will continue to be facilitated by educators based on individual accommodations, maximizing dignity and integration supported within each of our programs, whether within our schools physically or at the Learn at Home program. Students in special education classes will have daily programming supported by their teacher and educational assistants, whether selecting the in-person learning or the DDSB Learn at Home. Specifically, our teachers and our EAs and other support staff will remain a cohort, providing the flexibility for students such as those with medical fragility to be able to move between our two environments and stay connected to their programming space. At the secondary level, there are slight differences in our timetable variations based on programming outcomes and student needs. For example, students in developmental, practical learning programs or structured learning programs will have access to daily, full-day programming on site. Our school support programs and our gifted programs, which are based more on integration and access to regular timetabling, will follow the adaptive timetable. We are also working closely with our partners in cooperative education to plan for work experience, which is the foundation for our transition to work programs, including some of our other programs. Protocols have been developed related to use of alternate spaces such as calming rooms and sensory rooms, and we continue to work with our community partners where service intersects in the delivery of service in our schools. For instance, partnership with Grandview Children's Health Center on the delivery of occupational and physical health therapies, and community and partners in nursing on the direct service of students with nursing needs in schools. Mental health and well-being continues to be a core priority of the Durham District School Board and is based on 3 tiers of delivery. And as Acting Director Marsh mentioned, we know that this is important coming into the school year to be supporting all through the difference and challenge that comes into our classrooms coming out of the pandemic. We base our programs on 3 tiers of service. Tier 1 is our universal supports, K to 21 for all of our students and staff. And a couple examples are highlighted. For example, our 2 modified elementary schools are currently piloting the first 20 days of creating connection and well-being. Many of our schools facilitated these programs last year, and working through our mental health lead and clinical leads, the program has been adapted specific to this time period and the challenges that our students and families have faced over the prior months. We also launch a series of mental health and well-being podcasts, having heard from our adolescents as well as our families about needing to access resources in real time or at flex time to support them. As we move into being more responsive to those that have a higher level of need, we are serving benefit of having our virtual platform for clinical connects with our students licensed through to the end of June 2021. This allows us to be flexible whether students be served in our brick and mortar buildings or at home for service with our clinicians. We've also worked with our facility services team to dedicate a clinical space within each of our schools for that one-to-one connection for students on service. As we move to our tier 3 and specialized supports for students, we continue to grow our community connections and are proud to pilot a psychiatric consult this year as we look to connect students with services both within the board and in the community. We also greatly value our continued partnership through Grove School with our 11 education community partnership programs servicing our students with higher complexities of mental health needs.
Thank you. We'll turn it back over to Interim Associate Director Kisco.
Great, thank you. With respect to ministry funding, the good news back on, I guess it was last Monday, August the 4th, or last Tuesday, was a B11 memo that did come out, and it did provide additional funding support provincially of $309 million to school boards to help support their challenges with respect to return to school plans. First component of that was funding, they identified as funding for additional staff. Now, the challenge for us in this regard is $30 million of that, of their $80 million amount, was tagged for teaching staff, additional teaching staff where needed. However, there's some caveats around that. Funding is based, it's an application-based program, and that is, first of all, we have to determine exactly how close we are to our average class sizes and our, again, with respect to students opting out, really understanding our numbers before putting any request forward. And secondly, the requirement is that we can utilize reserves of up to 1% of our operating budget. So in other words, our reserves for us, 1% of our operating budget is $813 million. That would represent $8.1 million coming out of our own reserves to fund any additional staffing beyond in terms of the requirement, if in fact it is required. With respect to the second component of staffing, there was a $50 million announced, of which we have received nearly 1.8 million, 1.77 million, and this will help put in place additional custodian staff. For us, it represents approximately 20 additional custodians adding to our casual pool so that we can, in fact, supplement the staffing in this regard, and we will definitely need that support. There is an awful lot of cleaning that's going to be going on over the course of next year. With health and safety training funding was announced, and this was welcome news as well. 332,000 is what the board's allocation was out of their total 10 million announcement. The reason it was welcome news, this is recognizing recognizing our occasional teacher and casual staff to come in for training and actually be compensated for their time. Masks and protective equipment, the ministry has set up a process whereby we are ordering directly through the Ministry of Government and Consumer Services. We're putting our orders in. They're looking at a 1-month supply being provided to us through this process. This will take care of the masks and the protective eye and other PPE. What can't be ordered through the ministry, our purchasing staff have already sourced, and we are beginning to do our own ordering and increasing our inventory in these areas. Cleaning supplies, the board received 137,000. Again, it's small in comparison to the amount we typically spend on cleaning supplies. However, the confusing part of this announcement was there seems to be an indication or a reference made to cleaning supplies to help support the bus operators as well. So that clarification is still outstanding, and we will try to better understand what that really means. Special education, an amount of 260,000 was provided to us of the $10 million allocation. And again, the intention there is to hire additional casual EAs that will help support the efforts, and certainly in the virtual program, we're going to need the educational assistance support as well. With respect to mental health and well-being, this was part of a $25 million announcement. It came in 2 components. You'll recall they had announced $10 million for mental health. They doubled that amount. It is now $20 million for mental health, of which our allocation is $393,000. And we are looking at, again, providing supports and resources in that area. Technology, a $15 million announcement, of which we received $515,000. Again, this one's going to be very challenging given our dependency and dependence on technology today. It's a very small component of a very pressing cost. So that's in total what we did receive to date, and turn it back over to Nora. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to acknowledge that tonight's presentation really reflects a cross-section of many different staff members who have dedicated a significant time to the planning thus far, and want to certainly appreciate that there were teacher voice, educator voice, and other voice throughout the process, as well as our administrators. And in fact, we will be calling back all administrators early in order to do the restaffing and retimetabling. So really want to acknowledge the work that they've already done, all employee groups, in terms of the planning thus far. And we also recognize that there's still much more to do for us to be fully ready for welcoming our students back, either virtually or in person in September. However, we're very committed, and all of us acknowledge the importance of public education for our students as well as our families. We recognize that this is an unusual time and that families are coming from very different perspectives as far as the return to school. And our commitment is to continue to use the guiding principles and work with families. Understanding individual needs will be important, and that our staff will be responsive to families' needs as we move forward. I think that this concludes in terms of staff's presentation, but I recognize there may be many questions as well as further direction potentially from trustees. So happy to turn it back to you for that. Chair Brainy, and want to also acknowledge we did not address any transportation content because we're very pleased to have the CEO of Durham Student Transportation Services with us this evening, and that will be the second presentation. So for now, we'll hold any content in terms of transportation until she's had an opportunity to do her presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Acting Director Marsh and staff for that presentation. I know there's so much that's been happening so quickly, and appreciate the diligence of staff and yourself to put together the best information, the most information that we can get, and you've all been stellar throughout this whole process. So thank you. I'm going to we have a list of questions, but I'm going to go to Trustee Lundquist, and we'll go down the list. Go ahead, Nick. I'm there, Nikki.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you can hear you great.
Thank you. Struggling with audio still, it seems. My apologies. So I know that there are going to be many questions still, and I know that parents are going to be asking many questions in the coming days, and I appreciate how much thought has gone into this. But earlier, something was said that struck me as really important, which was we're planning with the utmost care and caution. And I know we're doing the best we can, but I don't think it's enough right now. And I say that because we're in an extraordinary situation. And I know that is not unique to us, but our situation in Durham is what we have to look at. And so we're being asked to implement a plan to educate kids, and we are constrained in many ways by what the government has dictated, and I recognize that. We're also in a bit of an unusual position because in Durham, unlike in Toronto and Peel today, Durham's Chief Medical Officer of Health has not actually offered any public comment or guidance on the directives of the government and whether they actually adequately protect students and staff, and by extension, families and our communities. So I'm hopeful that we will see that in the very near future. The reason I raise that though is because other public health authorities have expressed concern that the government is implementing and instituting smaller class sizes. And that is something which was identified as a priority strategy for mitigating risks for students. The guidance statements, which the government has repeatedly relied on, in fact, stress the critical importance of an appropriate bundle of health and safety measures to mitigate risk for students. And that actually includes the capacity to socially distance in those smaller class sizes. So I'm struggling with some of this because I don't think it's going to be enough. I understand that it is absolutely and emphatically true that there's not going to be a perfect solution here. I completely understand that. We are in an unprecedented time, and we have to take that into consideration. And for me, I think it is incumbent on us as school trustees to do everything we can, take every reasonable step to mitigate risks as we reopen schools. Because if we don't, we have no hope of keeping them open, and we recognize that they are a place where children need to be. So I took a significant amount of time on the weekend and reviewed the Sick Kids reports and their subsequent commentary. And I was a bit surprised because it actually suggested that there was limited evidence on which to base a pre-specified class size. But what it did say was that the decision should take into account available classroom space and the number of exposures that would occur should a student or staff member test positive. I will be blunt and say I've heard from well over 150 parents. Almost all of them would like to have their children return to classes on a full-time basis, so 5 days a week. but they want to do that in the safest way possible, as we all must. They see that as really important for providing their children with a supportive learning and positive mental health environment, but also because it's the only plan that allows them to support their families. The government hasn't provided our school board with the funding to reduce cohort sizes. I'm clear on that, at least for elementary students. But what it has done, and Acting Director Kisco actually clarified some of my questions on this, was that it has made it a precondition for us, if we want to hire additional teaching staff, to go into our reserves to the tune of potentially $8.1 million to get any help from them at all. And I did a very quick look at the numbers as they were presented on the ministry funding slide. We got less than 4% of what was allocated for custodial staff. So I presume that proportionately we would have a similar amount of the $30 million. So we would get $1.2 million in or around there for teaching staff under the current plan. And that would be at most a dozen teachers across the entire district. And to me, that isn't adequate in any way, shape, or form. So I just want to express a little bit of concern about the reserves, because I recognize that we use those reserves for really important things. And in particular, we use them for special education supports, and that those supports been grossly underfunded by successive governments. And I recognize authorizing 1% out of our budget, out of those reserves, $8.1 million is a tremendous hit. It's huge. Last week, the Minister of Education actually referred to those funds that we have as rainy day funds. He said so in a press conference, and I actually thought that was a really disappointing mischaracterization, because they are actually the dam that supports the system from collapsing for many kids in it. It is the way we provide equitable educational opportunities. And so I understand that using reserve funding is a concerning prospect for the future. I get that, but despite that, I know that the government of Ontario should be covering all of the costs directly related to this pandemic. It has refused to move though, and we have to recognize that. It has not moved on this issue. I'm hoping that more parental pressure will encourage them to do so, but at this stage they have not. And so in that context, to me, accessing reserve funds with a clear demand that they be replaced is really the most prudent thing to do if we are actually going to enhance safety measures that align with the expert recommendations that are to be implemented. And to me, if ever there was a time to use those emergency funds, it is now. So I have what I think is a very long motion, and I apologize for that. And I don't have it typed up exactly at this stage. But what I would like to do is read it and then try to get a copy of it in writing to all of the trustees while the discussion continues on, if that's okay. So my motion would be something like this. The DDSB adopt the plan as provided in respect of secondary students, which provides for both in-class learning and virtual learning opportunities and smaller cohorts. Understanding that the board has been designated as adaptive or a blended model by the province and cannot at this time return to 5 days of in-class learning for secondary students. Should the DDSB seek to implement adaptations of the plan, which may be necessary to ensure equitable access to educational opportunities, particularly in rural communities, the Board of Trustees will be apprised of any intended changes to the plan and informed of what steps are being taken to ensure students and staff safety. Number 2, the DDSB adopt the plan for virtual learning for elementary students and adjust its plan for students electing to return in-person learning by ensuring A, all classes allow for the distancing of students at a minimum of 1 meter as recommended in the guidance documents relied upon by the government for other aspects of its reopening plan. B, taking whatever steps are necessary to ensure a minimum of 1 meter spacing for students, including, but not limited to, reorganizing classes, providing portables, exploring opportunities for using common spaces as classrooms, redeploying or hiring additional educational staff, and taking any other steps that are operationally necessary to give effect to subsection 2A above. Number 3, the DDSB authorizes the board to use reserve funds of up to 1% of the board's 2020 budget to facilitate the adoption of mitigation measures to keep students and staff as safe as possible. 4, the DDSB create a program that encouraged mask use for all students, subject to the duty to accommodate. 5, the DDSB immediately provide a strongly worded letter to the Ministry of Education expressing grave concern about the failure to use small class sizes as a priority safety strategy and urging the government to immediately provide all funding necessary to all school boards to ensure the full hierarchy of safety controls be put in place as schools reopen, including the funds to provide additional staff to create smaller and safer cohorts in elementary schools, and additional funding for upgrades and improvements to ventilation in schools as required. 6, that the DDSB publicly release a copy of that letter in the form of a press release. So I have all kinds of other questions about the plan, but it seems to me that these issues are urgent and I wanted to put them out there as quickly as I could. So I'm going to do my best to type them up into something that is legible and readable to everybody, and I will email that momentarily. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Sorry, Trustee Crawford, I have Trustee Templeton.
I just wanted to make a point of order. I mean, could we deal with the question period first before dealing with motions? I know that this will go through, but we should deal with questions first and then.
Well, we are going to, Trustee Crawford. So, point of order to you. We got to go down the list as presented right now. So we have Trustee Templeton. You're up.
Okay.
Templeton, are you online? Go ahead. Yep.
Just had trouble with the mute. It's going back to the transfer of payments. I think it's already been answered on the last slide with the money that we've received from the government already. So through you, Chair Brainy, to Nora Marsh, or I believe Intern Kisco, I know Nikki mentioned something about 4%, which when I looked at it and worked it out, that's about what it works out to. My question was based on the $30 million that the government has put aside for school boards. Now there's 72 school boards in Ontario. And would that number be approximately exact? Like, would it be approximately a guesstimate as what Nikki put forward of the 1.2 million? Because that's roughly around where I had it as well. And a supplement to that, how many teachers would that actually bring into the board?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Brainy, I'll begin, and then interim Associate Director Kisco will finish. I think one of the things to note about the proportion of DDSB funding from the ministry memos is that it's difficult to predict because it's an application process for the additional teaching funding, which is different than what we saw in the other scopes of the memo in terms of, for example, custodial support or cleaning supplies. We were allocated a proportionate percentage, a proportion, so that we could identify then, you know, in theory what it would be. But the access to the teaching funds is different because you have to apply for it. And they've made it clear that you have to show a pressure around your current class size average, not a smaller class size average, and that you have to have spent 1% of your operating budget out of reserves first. So I think that funding seems a little bit more unpredictable in terms of what would be made available to us. But I will turn it over to Acting Interim Associate Director to answer the question in terms of the number of teaching staff.
Thank you, Director Marsh. With respect to the percentage, so we represent about 3.8% of the total province when it comes to enrollment. If in fact it was, as Trustee Marsh said, or sorry, as Director Marsh said, it really isn't a proportional allocation that would be provided. But if they had done it that way, the amount we would have received is about 1.14 million of the total 30 million. Of that, our average, that would represent at best about 10 to 11 teaching staff based on our average cost of teachers.
Okay, thank you. That's pretty much what I figured. Not that many teachers, which wouldn't help us at all. Anyways, thank you.
Thanks, Trustee Templeton. You're up now, Trustee Crawford. Are you there, Paul?
Yeah, I thought I had unmuted myself, but I didn't. Sorry.
Yep, no problem.
I muted myself when you told me to be quiet.
Is that what you did?
That's how obedient I am.
Oh, you're awesome.
Okay. Okay, I wanted to make a statement first about all of what we're doing here. The mechanics seem to be in place, but we wouldn't be doing all of this if there wasn't some threat or possibility that people are going to get sick. So my first question is, ordinarily when school starts, who is responsible for the safety of the students and staff? And I'll just ask it straightforward. I know everybody is, but are the trustees? Anybody can answer that question.
I'll answer it. Yeah, we all are, Paul.
And therefore, if we're responsible for the safety, then we're also liable for anything that goes wrong with the safety factor. And that would
we
be
certainly
correct.
have it. Certainly it's paramount that we have that responsibility, Paul. So.
Right, and it's also paramount that we have the liability. But we do not have the option of opting out of the starting date. Is that also true?
I'm not sure about that, Paul.
So can we find that out? Because I want to find out how much responsibility and liability that we have. And do we have the option of opting out of the starting date, or do we have the option of changing different starting dates in different parts of Durham? And as Nikki pointed out, we haven't heard from the health person in Durham. So I need to know something about statistically, what are the possibilities that people are going to get sick if we go into the program the way that it's set up? Statistically, I know that it's very small and that the government and we should be emphasizing it, but it's something that we should know.
Thanks, Paul. Is that your question then?
That's my question. I realize it might not, maybe we can't answer it now, but it certainly should be part of our presentation as well. And the way I understand it, it's distancing that's most important. And as long as our classrooms are large enough that we can provide the distancing, then that should suffice. It's not so much numbers, class size numbers. It's more distancing.
Thanks, Paul. I would say.
And with that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Paul.
I'll put those questions out there and then I'm going to rest and maybe come back later.
Thanks, Paul. I think your perception is correct that it's probably too early to answer that one question. However, I think it's a good question, something to think about, and it's something we can certainly discuss and talk about as we move forward. And perhaps maybe we'll have some more clarification.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Acting Director Marsh. Do you have something to add to that?
Through you, Chair, in terms of the notion of postponing the beginning of the school year, we don't have the authority to change our school year calendar. That is approved through the Ministry of Education, and we need to meet certain requirements in terms of between this date and that date. So we do not have the authority to change our school year calendar. That would need to come from the Ministry of Education.
Even in a unique situation where safety is a factor?
That is correct.
Thanks. We'll then move on to Trustee Thatcher.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy. I wanted to start by saying that Trustee Lundquist does make some very good points. I was really impressed by the fact that she actually has counted the number of emails and phone calls that we've received of late, 150. So many of them included a very long list of questions, and many of those have been answered tonight with the presentation. So I'd just like to say thank you for that. Before I talk to Trustee Lundquist's proposal, I wanted to say that one of the main concerns of many of our parents, I would say probably the number one concern, is definitely around class sizes. This question probably would be for Carla or Acting Director Marsh. Our most challenging group with respect to social and physical distancing is our kindergarten students, which we have the largest class sizes of 30. To have teachers in the room, but we have 30 4- and 5-year-old students in one room who it's not mandatory for them to wear masks or face shields. And so what I'm curious about is what is in place that we can assure our parents that we have put the best possible safety measures in place for these students, the students at our kindergarten level. That's my first question. So, Associate Director Kisco, is that something you might help us with?
I'm sorry, I just saw Director Marsh may want to chime in initially. Director Marsh? No, go ahead. Okay, thank you. So what are the measures we're putting in place? As I spoke earlier, I shared with you that number one, distance, the 1 meter distance, which Trustee Lundquist has put in her motion as being minimum distance. Again, it is in fact what is being recommended by in the Sick Kids report, and that seems to be what we're trying to model in terms of our classroom setup. We've got 1 meter distance as being the minimum. So that's number one, setting up classrooms so that in fact is the case. Secondly, encouraging the use of masks, even though it is not mandatory in kindergarten to grade 3. Again, there's again the opportunity for families and students to come to school with cloth masks so they can continue to protect themselves and protect those around them. Third is the hand washing etiquette and sneezing and coughing, respiratory etiquette. We can't, we really truly do have to have all our children and staff made aware of and constantly reminded of the importance of that. We hear it all the time from the medical experts, keep your hands away from your face. And it's hard to do when you've got small children around. I have a grandson who's constantly, his hands are constantly around his face. But in fact, that's one of the challenges and constant reminders that would need to happen. So those 3 things in terms of ensuring the physical distance, in trying to really impress upon all of our students and staff about the hand hygiene and respiratory etiquette, as well as making sure, and this will be in place, that hand sanitizer readily available. There's going to be washing sinks in some classrooms where soap will always be refilled with soap and paper towels. And, we have to have the supplies on hand so that kids are, and staff feel that they can constantly keep up with the cleaning of themselves and their hands throughout the day.
Through you, Chair Brainia, I will add as well, from an instructional point of view, we plan on using part of the we have 3 PA days before we welcome students back into our schools. And one of the things we really do need to address is how do you shift in terms of play-based curriculum, and we understand that our commitment to that is an appropriate way for that age of child to be learning, but how do we do it in a way that is safe? So for example, creating pouches where every student has their individual pouch as far as manipulatives, other resources that they would have from an instructional point of view. It is going to be a different way of thinking about how we engage those students. I think it's also very interesting that of the students so far, families who've signed up for the virtual experience, kindergarten is by far the largest subscription at the elementary level. I think it's approximately 1,300 students currently at the kindergarten level have signed up for virtual learning out of, I think, about 6,000 elementary students. So it's the biggest grade that we're seeing families asking for the virtual environment.
Supplemental, Chair Brainy?
Sure.
Yes, and thank you very much for that. I just wondering then, if that's the case, Nora, would that impact the class sizes at that level? If this is the case, if these families are opting for the virtual learning, would that somehow impact, I'm just kind of hoping it will, but will that impact the class sizes at the kindergarten level?
The challenge we have in terms of class size is that we haven't had the opportunity to increase the number of teachers we have as a district. So without an increase in the number of teachers, what we need to do is shift those teachers who are physically present in a physical school and place them within the virtual learning environment. That means we'll have less teachers than, because the enrollment has gone down at school sites. So really, one of the reasons why we have the deadline of the 12th in terms of families signing up is that we then want to analyze school by school how that plays out, because in a particular site, as you know, as we've always done, you may have an unusual number of students, and so you staff where you have 2 smaller classes because the number of students were too high for 1 class. However, until we get the enrollment grade by grade, by school, we won't be able to identify where we have challenges. What we do know is that there will be some efficiency in staffing the virtual school, and so there will be an opportunity for us to be able to address potentially some of those larger classes. But really, until we see all of the final numbers and do the breakdown school by school, it's difficult to know how many that will be.
Thank you so much. And Chair Brady, I just have one more quick question.
Sure.
As I mentioned, thank you so much. As I mentioned, Trustee Lundquist makes some very good points. I guess my question is that the 1% is already sanctioned by the ministry. So my question is, do we need a motion to do what we already can do? I'm just looking for some clarification.
It's a good question, Trustee Thatcher.
Thank you, Chair Brainy.
That would, I would probably let who would you like to answer that, Nora?
We definitely need a motion. If
Go ahead, Carla.
Oh,
You have your hand up. Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
So staff would definitely need.
Trustee Lundquist. Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I'm entirely clear that we would absolutely need that motion to authorize the board to spend the money because it's not in the budget document that we passed. If Acting Director Marsh or I'm sorry, Carla, I'm so bad with these titles still.
Never a problem.
Acting Associate Director thinks differently, I'd be delighted to hear that, but my understanding is that it is a requirement.
Yeah, if I could, I just want to support what Nora has previously indicated. We don't need necessarily, I mean, the ministry is directing us in this way, but in terms of tapping into reserves, it's again, the board that has to determine when we in fact tap into reserves and for what purpose. So the motion would be a supportive piece of approval, component of approval.
Thank you. Then go on to Trustee Forbes.
Thank you, Chair Brainy. So yes, there's definitely a lot of anxiety and fear that I've been receiving phone calls and emails from parents, as we all have. I guess you answered my question, Acting Director Marsh, by saying really the class size isn't, although it seems like it would be potentially a good idea with the virtual learning, but because we have to shift teachers to our virtual schools, there's no reduction, potential reduction in class sizes overall for the system. So the only way to achieve that would be through additional staffing. I believe I have that summarized correctly. Do we feel that I know that we've been able to get the 1 meter spacing and can get the 25 desks. I guess what are the contingencies if we have 27 students and we can only get 25 desks in a classroom? And that's, I guess, where the hard caps come into play, because not every school classroom is going to be the same size, and therefore you'll be able to get more or fewer desks. I guess, I guess I'm just looking for an assurance that no matter what happens, we're able to accommodate the minimum distance requirements.
Who'd like to take that?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Brainy. I think that the first contingency plan we would have in terms of if we have more students than we can fit in a classroom 1 meter apart, we would look to see if there's larger space available that we can then shift into classroom teaching and learning space. So that would be our first avenue as far as addressing the challenge. We'll also look for any efficiencies we get in staffing in terms of the virtual staffing, and then have a small pot of potentially of teachers then that we would then address if we don't have a larger space available, but to split a class potentially. However, I have to say I'm very cautious about how many will actually generate through the efficiencies of staffing in the virtual school, recognizing that as you have larger schools, you get more efficiencies, but unpredictable how many teachers that will generate for us at this point. At that stage, and Interim Associate Director Kisco may want to jump in with more information, but at that stage, we did make the commitment that we would then communicate back to you in terms of where we are as far as large classes. We think we will have those numbers by August 25th. But we do not have a plan in terms of for classes that are larger than with the 1 meter distancing. And we also recognize that the direction to us from the Ministry of Education has not been to have that 1 meter distancing. We have done that ourselves based on the report from the Sick Kids Hospital.
And I just have a supplemental. So I understand that the contingency plan isn't complete yet, but would we ever look at using outside facilities like community halls or church basements or other public spaces that might be physically close to the school if we had those situations come up?
So through you, Chair, I think that one of the things we're attempting to do is mitigate risk. As soon as we start moving into unknown spaces where we don't have control over the physical facility, we need to understand that we're exchanging one set of risks for another set of risks. And so that is a challenge for us. The other question that we would have to sort through, although it wouldn't be insurmountable, would be the transportation question and what that would look like potentially. Recognizing from a safety perspective, we could not shift one class ever to one location, understanding that we rotate teachers. And while we're limiting the rotary of teachers, there is an expectation from the staff's perspective that they have accesses to the resources they would normally have within their school, like the photocopier, the staff room, sort of the resources within the library. And so those would all be challenges, I think, in terms of looking at space that is external to the school site. So I don't want to rule it out completely, but I would suggest that the risks involved in that scenario would actually just be exchanging one set of risks for another. We would also, in terms of, from an employment standard, there is language in terms of sites where we can have staff. So that would be another question that we would have to explore with more diligence. Interim Associate Director Kisco, I'm not sure if there's anything you'd like to add from your perspective from facilities.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that it is a case-by-case analysis, and that's exactly what we're going to undergo. We started with trying to just put in the desks in the physical spaces that we know our room sizes are. We have room sizes at 750, at 800, and at 1,000. So as we, again, space out 1 meter distance, can we fit, what number of desks can we fit in a class size of 750, and we have confirmed that it is 25. So how many can we fit into a class of 20 that's 800 square feet? Well, we've confirmed that it can go up a little bit. We can fit 26, and beyond that we start getting with the larger spaces, you can obviously fit in more desks. So it's really a situation of looking at each school, looking at where those larger spaces are. Larger schools will have larger spaces, not necessarily classroom spaces, but they'll have other common areas that are larger that we would have to be considering to move larger cohorts into. And not every school will have class sizes beyond 25. Some schools will, some schools may only have one, so that's a solution that can be put in place, but others may have multiple grades that are over 25, or multiple classes with over 25, in which case, again, those are the pressure points. It's case by case, and that's exactly what staff are working on. As soon as we get the information from parents with respect to the preference to come in person, we'll be able to start that analysis, putting all the pieces of the puzzle together.
Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. It's not finalized yet, so these are kind of unknowns at this point, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Trustee Forbes. Before we go to our next speaker, just wanted everyone to know that Trustee Templeton had sent me a message to say that he would second Trustee Lundquist's motion. So we'll then go to Trustee Edwards.
In that case, then if it's already seconded by trustee, then we're speaking to the motion and we can't ask questions. That's sort of a point of order. If it's been first and second, then we only can speak to the motion, and we still haven't got a copy of the motion. It's really hard to do that, Chris.
Well,
Sure, point of information, we do have a copy of the motion that was sent us in an email about 30 minutes ago.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, so basically we have to speak to the motion because it's been first and seconded. So I'll ask some questions around the motion then.
Well, that's the procedure, Trustee Edwards. Sorry, it's
no, I know, but it's just that you've cut off other people to have questions, you should have left that then after everybody had questions, and then we could speak to the motion.
No,
And so
not
you've cut
necessarily,
a
Trustee
process.
Edwards. No, I'll call the shots here tonight. Sorry.
Yeah.
If you want to speak to the motion, go for it.
I have a question around our reserves. How much is in our reserves, and how much is already allocated? That's my first question.
So our unallocated reserves, in other words, formerly called the working fund reserves, is right now at $14.5 million. Please appreciate it takes years to build up the reserves.
Yes.
And that's a sizable, a significant amount that takes years to build up.
Yes, and that's it is. I recognize that, and when you look at most business plans, they say that you should have at least 6 months is sort of what our what should be left in reserves. We don't have that. Based on what our operation, plus we have contracts that are signed and delivered we have to deal with, and those are contracts that will carry on to the next year. So that's a particular issue. And then class sizes, again, we do have contracts, and they're in most cases they're averages, and not a cap. And so I guess one of the things that struck me a little strange looking at the presentation and the class sizes and the picture that was there, and considering the person, that one of them in particular, you'd see they're standing at the very edge of the back. I can only count 15 desks in there. I can't count 25, and it looks like more of a high school than whatever. And this is where I give kudos to our facilities people who have constantly fought for a larger class size when we're building, because it's 700 square meters is what is normally we've been getting 750. So I have a problem. Especially our older schools, having a problem of trying to get 25 in those classrooms. I don't think we'll meet the 1 meter, and we definitely won't meet the 1 meter unless those SK and JK kids can sit in a single little spot all day long. They're not going to meet that when you have 30 plus 2, so that's 32 people in that classroom. That is a real problem. And that 1 meter distance is based on them wearing masks as well. They're recommending 1 meter with masks. So that's another issue as far as safety is concerned. And I just, although I agree with a lot of the points that Trustee Lindquist has said, the ministry has put trustees again in a spot where we have to look at trying to mitigate risk for our students and not providing the funding to do so, and not having clear guidelines, especially when it comes to providing staffing. The numbers said that they've added additional staffing, but we have to use our reserves. And what's going to happen when that cost is a lot larger? And I still think that cost for COVID-19 is going to be a lot larger. They've already told Toronto Board that they're not going to increase the class sizes. They had said, and they're pushing for, I can see us pushing for, but we're not going to meet the 1 meter in a lot of cases. And that's my concern. As well as my concern is that the masks. Why can't we, even though they said it's that we students don't have to wear them, but they can wear them. I think we should still come up with a stronger statement about the kindergarten kids, because that's the most number of parents that have been calling me is from kindergarten to grade 3, and their concerns are about their health and safety. And I just got an email again today of a parent who said that they've now decided, I've I forwarded them the guide because they said they still hadn't received it, but I forwarded them that and they said they still won't go online. But it also concerns me around students, parents, and the socioeconomics of those parents, those single parents or those parents that have to go to work and they rely on the school. They have no choice but to send their child. So it's the have and have nots that we're doing again. And that those parents that can afford to keep their child at home and do online, that's what's going to happen. And those kids that, the parents that can't afford it, they will be sending their kids into basically a higher risk environment, those K-3 students, as far as I'm concerned. The other question is more around, really, that was a statement. I was sort of ranting and raving, but the question was more around transportation and cleaning. I know that, so we still haven't got, there was an additional 4 million, and that's what my understanding, out of the 4 million, we were getting the 137,000 plus for, and that was for busing as well as custodial cleaning, which was kind of bizarre. And then they were going to give another additional funding for cleaning supplies. But again, it's in the memorandum, it said for transportation, it didn't say it for schools. Can you clarify with that for me?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, that's one of the points of clarification that is still outstanding for me as well. The memo speaks to the cleaning supply component, and within that same area, they're speaking about buses as well as schools, which does cause confusion in terms of really the responsibility for cleaning buses is not the school board's responsibility. It's the bus operator's responsibility. It's part of the service arrangement. There is ongoing conversations between our transportation staff and the bus operators with respect to those requirements, high touch points, et cetera, being cleaned as kids, as kids exit and before the buses were used. So that responsibility is there. With respect to the funding, that's a blurry area for me as well. We're still trying to get clarity around that, and we'll certainly share it once we do.
Okay, and the last question is to clarify, because there was a couple of those items that we had already included in our budget. I thought for sure one was part of the mental health, the 196,000 we had already put in our budget. And if I'm not mistaken, the technology was another one that we had included in our budget, yes or no? There was two items I thought that we had already included in our budget.
We substantially budgeted for technology because of just it being a pressure point and a requirement in order for us to, to continue with providing programming in different forms. So yes, we increased our budget, but we did not have at that time any understanding of exactly what our allocation would be of the 15 million. So the 500,000 that will help offset what we budgeted, but it's pales in comparison to what our actual budget for technology is.
Okay, and I guess, and that to clarify too, is that we also budgeted, we had said that the 536,000 that was for fuel charge, we had to give back, but we also gave that basically out, and we said we would hold that for PPE for transportation. So so we already have 536,000 for PPE for transportation.
That's correct. It was never clawed back from the operators, and it was held as a credit for PPE purposes for the operators. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brainy. I'd like to make a statement first and then pose a few questions. Firstly, We all recognize the need to open schools safely. We also recognize that many jurisdictions worldwide have reopened schools and then had to backtrack and close them. We've got a huge responsibility to open our schools the right way, the best way possible, protecting our students, our staff, our parents, our entire communities. The province of Ontario needs to listen to the concerns expressed by our parents and our teachers. If mistakes are made now in reopening, there will be repercussions in the months ahead. The greatest concern that has been expressed to me is class size in kindergarten and grades 4 to 8. We can't follow social distancing guidelines with 25 or 30 students in a room. If we expect social distancing rules to apply in other public places, then the classroom should be no different. We're talking about that 1 meter distance and setting a classroom up with desks. But we must realize that many of our classrooms don't have individual student desks. They have tables. And I'm thinking that having 25 to 30 students in a classroom with these very large rectangular tables, that may be a little bit more difficult. I have a question for Interim Associate Director Carla Kisco. And the question is, we all see the advantages of taking that 8.1 million from our reserve fund. That's obvious. But are there any disadvantages that we need to be aware of?
Thank you for your question, Trustee Morton. Absolutely, it's very difficult to accumulate a reserve, and it's very difficult, particularly because budgets are very stretched. So accumulating reserves that are, again, it's built up over the years. Once it's spent, it's one-time money. Once it's spent, it is gone. So you may, in fact, depending on how long our COVID world lasts, if in fact we do dip into that reserve fund substantially, that's how much less you have to address your issue, your challenge for future years. And the COVID world that we're living, let's all hope for the vaccination, but quite honestly, if in fact you need to continue with that level of support being in place, you won't have the funding to do that in future years.
Thank you. Then I'm going to put forward a recommendation regarding the motion. The motion has lots of wonderful things in it. I received it, but it's on my phone. A bit of time to reflect on that, to think about it before we can make a decision. I want to be able to take the time and reading it on my computer as opposed to my phone. Thank you.
Trustee Noble.
I was muted there, sorry. I have a few comments that I'm going to try and summarize into one comment, as a lot of my thoughts have been said already. But throughout the presentations tonight, we've heard the phrase that we are guided by principles of human rights, equity, mental health, and well-being multiple times. And when it comes to well-being, and especially the well-being of our students and staff, there's absolutely no room for trial and error, especially in a pandemic. And I know we've discussed class sizes multiple times in this setting and what to do. And I do believe that we should be using what we can out of the reserves to ensure that we have smaller class sizes. COVID is beyond what anyone imagined when we were initially told that we were going to have an extra 2 weeks of spring break back in March. Nobody expected to be having online meetings still in August. And there is a bit of irony in the fact that the ministry announcements all occur in these large rooms with a maximum of 4 to 5 people alongside not just the legislature, but most school boards still currently having virtual meetings while discussing how many students should be in a classroom. There is irony there, and I have to acknowledge it, as I've gotten a lot of comments about it. I do believe that passing this motion that Trustee Lundquist has laid out is more than just about moving money, but it's more symbolic as well. It's us telling the government that what they're doing is not enough. This is a pandemic. We have not had a situation like this since 1918 with the Spanish flu, and that lasted 2.5 years. We do not have room to make trial and error and have errors and risk human lives here. I do believe in everything that Trustee Lundquist's motion lays out, and I have had the chance to both hear it verbally and read it. During the span of this meeting and this discussion alone, I've gotten 3 emails from parents concerned about class sizes. I believe that if the trustees truly believe in well-being, as we continue to say we do, we have to do what is morally right and support the use of the reserve funds to ensure the well-being of all students and staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Barnes?
Thank you. I've been patiently waiting. There was 2 points of order that we brought up that we should note. This is a special meeting and any motion should have been sent prior to the meeting. So that's a point of order that we should note. When there's a special meeting, all information should be sent prior to the meeting. The other one was once the motion was on the floor, it should have been spoken to. I mean, it came on the floor and then we had numerous discussions and questions around it, but the motion should have been dealt with once it was on the floor. My question is, we planned a rotating 15 cohort for elementary prior to the final plan that was put forward. Why can't we continue with that timetabling that we had prior?
Through you, Chair Brainy, happy to answer that question, Trustee Barnes. So we did spend, after the June memo, we did take time to plan an elementary model that was an adaptive model. And so there are 2 things about that model that I think it's very important we be transparent about. The first is it was for every second day, so that we were splitting classes into cohort A and cohort B, similar to what we've done in secondary. So it was an alternative day model, and it was a shortened day to accommodate then those students who were on their off day at home as far as doing independent learning, so that there could be a connection back to the classroom teacher every day through synchronous learning as well. We did plan a model to fulfill that requirement, but the Ministry of Education's announcement then in July directed us to not go forward with that model and rather to do a full day every day in school personal model.
So what would be the impact if we chose to go 15 and opposed to what the ministry is dictating?
Through you, Chair Brainy, if I understand the question correctly, if we were to do cohorts of 15, then you would be suggesting we would go to that alternate day model so that school would be half-time with a shortened day. That would be something that we don't have the authority to do given the Ministry of Education's direction to us. So I think that would be something we would have to pursue through the Ministry of Education. They've been fairly directive in terms of the length of the day, and that's elementary students would be present every day unless the family was opting into the virtual environment.
So we've been put forward that we should pull money from our reserve to fund cohorts of 15. What would be that impact? Do we have that authority?
So if we use reserve money, we would hire additional teachers and we would have to access additional space within the school. So the additional staffing will solve the challenge where there's teachers with the qualification and where we have space to accommodate additional classes. And we'll have to get creative if that's the direction of the board to us in terms of identifying areas for smaller cohorts then to learn within the school. Obviously, a cohort of 15 is easier to determine a learning space than a larger class. So that would be then what our analysis would do. And again, then we would have to identify challenges and then look at the lead time for portable setup is fairly long. So if that were the direction, we would need to identify immediately where we think we might need portables, and there might be a potential delay in terms of having those portables in place and ready for school startup.
Okay, and for the students that are in school, are we prepping them in case we have to switch to online learning?
Thank you again through you, Chair Brainy. Appreciate the question. Definitely in the 3 PA days before school starts when we're working with our staff, We will engage in professional learning for all staff in terms of virtual learning and engaging students, understanding the pedagogy is very different in a virtual environment than it is in class. And the expectation then would be if we encounter situations where potentially a class needs to be home for a period of time, we would continue on through virtual learning with their classroom teacher.
One more question, if that's okay. So we overfund special education. Do we usually take that out of our reserves, or how do we usually come? I think this year we did 4.5.
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, yes, in the past, if there was a pressure to the bottom line, because of our $4.5 million over expenditure in special education, or for other pressures, reserve funds are the way that we offset that.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Barnes, I'm also going to remind you that this is a special board meeting. So your question, or what you were saying of your point of order, a motion is only required in writing, not in advance for a special board meeting.
Sorry, under what I read, I thought all information was supposed to be sent, and trustees were supposed to get that within 24 hours of the meeting.
We can certainly, if you'd like, you seem concerned about it, we could certainly have a ruling through our board council.
At this point, it doesn't matter. As long as all the trustees are amenable to discussing the motion, it's on the floor.
Trustee Crawford?
Yeah, we're not discussing the motion. We're having a question period, just like the chair said, and he's quite right in setting aside the motion for the time being. So as far as points of order are concerned, this is question time. And
thank you, Trustee Crawford. That's exactly what I'm trying to do, is give people the opportunity.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And there's nothing wrong with points of order either. So we're gathering information right now, and I think we're getting hung up on this class size being the solution. If that was the solution, then the government would just put it in and hand us a couple of $1 billion more. That's not the problem. The problem is how many people are going to get sick if we do what we're doing. And it's obvious that percentage-wise, it's very, very low, or the government wouldn't be going through with it. Also, as the director has pointed out, we have to do what the government says. We can send back a motion to them or a letter to them, giving them some instructions and maybe giving them some advice, but we have no choice but to start on that date. And I guess if we wanted to, we could bring forth a motion saying to the government, we will not start on that date because it won't be safe and we're not going to jeopardize ourselves. And maybe when it gets closer to that date, we might want to do something like that to protect ourselves. But getting hung up on class size is not a good idea. For instance, if we really wanted to save money and space, why don't we just say that kindergarten children don't come at this time? Why don't they set that off for a different date? That would give us more space and it would give us more money. There's solutions to these problems, but at this particular time, we have to go with what the government's given us. And so I'm suggesting that maybe, Mr. Chair, would need another meeting. Maybe we should treat that motion as a notice of motion for another meeting. And at that time, we could get into the nuts and bolts of what we should be doing and what we should be saying to the government. At this time, we should be gathering information. And the single most important thing is to mitigate risk. We need to know what the risk factor is. Somebody knows that, and we need to know it. And we need to know what it drops to if we change class size or do anything else. That's not a question, but I'd sure like some comments on it.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. First part of your question, we certainly, since Trustee Lundquist moved the motion, that would certainly be up to her to defer it. But she is next on the speaker list, so I will go to Trustee Lundquist.
I'm hoping you can hear me this time.
Yep.
So we have limited options in terms of what we can do. We are a subordinate body to the government. We can't override what they have told us. We can work within those parameters. And the motion is actually speaking to what we can practically do as a board to address some of the most profound deficiencies of the government's plan. It isn't perfect. I am struggling with this idea, I have to admit, that we are going to hold on to reserves for a small number of students while not supporting student safety as a whole. To me, I understand everything that Associate Director Kisco was saying in terms of reserves and in terms of the years it takes to build reserves. And I appreciate that, and I understand it, and I understand that it is preferable to have them, and it is good practice and good policy, and I appreciate all of that. But I'm gonna just observe this. This is not a business. This is public education. And if we can't educate students safely, we shouldn't be educating students at all. So to me, I'm not prepared to withdraw the motion. I'm not prepared to table it at this stage. And the reason I'm not prepared to do that is because there are weeks left until school starts. Weeks, not months, not anything but weeks. And to me, it's not responsible to put this off. There is a fundamental issue that is before us, and it is, how do we best protect our students and staff? And to me, we use whatever means are available to us to do that, and that's what this motion is meant to speak to. So it is not my intention to do anything but ask for a vote on this motion to proceed tonight.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Edwards?
What I was going to suggest is that because there are many parts to this particular motion, I think that if we're going to go to a vote, I would appreciate if we go part by part to it. I still have, it's not that I disagree with a lot of the stuff that Trustee Lundquist has said. What I'm having a problem is especially around come the dollars, in that we've already got approval per se, and I know from the ministry that we can use it, and I know we have to set a motion for the budget, but I still have a problem of not knowing all the facts first and actually knowing how many is going to be in the school, etc. Before I make an actual budget decision and the impacts of that. But a lot of the other stuff I'd really rather see us do a point by point for motion and not this 7 or so motion. So that's my recommendation.
Once again, that would be up to Trustee Lundquist to decide if she wanted to do that. Trustee Noble, go ahead.
You're still on mute, Ashley. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Brainy. I just have a few comments again based on previous comments made. One of them being, I don't think we're ever going to have the exact amount of numbers of the exact amount of people that are going to be in each classroom and each school, only because this is a pandemic. We do not know what is going to happen. We do not know if one of our schools is going to have to close down. We don't know if students are going to go for 2 weeks and find out that they'd rather work online again. We do not know. There is so much in the unknown, and it is out of our control altogether. It's not in the hands of the ministry. It's not in anybody's hands, because we are dealing with circumstances that we have never dealt with before. That aside, though, acknowledging the one point that the government did say we have the ability to use $8.1 million from our reserves. Acknowledging that class sizes is not just the issue during COVID. It has been an issue since we started our term. I remember receiving lots of emails back then regarding class sizes and with the unions and the government and all the collective bargaining that was happening. The government, and let me clarify, I am not speaking on behalf of the board when I say this next statement. This is my personal belief, my thoughts. The government is not always right. And that has been seen, at least in my eyes, from the comments that I have heard from parents in the community and from looking around our schools. We have been severely underfunded for the past 2 years. We had to make cuts that we didn't want to make. So to say that the government has the ability to tell us what money we need and what money needs to go where is beyond me. And I'm truly shocked that we are even having this discussion right now, because you cannot put a price, you cannot put a dollar sign on the lives of our staff and of our students that are going to be back in our schools in September, in just a few weeks. It is absolutely very mind-boggling and concerning to me that we are even debating how much money should go towards this. If $8.1 million from our reserves is enough to ensure that more students and more staff are safe, I will accept that 110%. What matters at the end of the day, and what matters the most in our decision on this motion, is, are people going to be safe? Will it provide more safety and well-being for not just our staff and students, but for all of our families and the general community of Durham Region? That's what our priority should be, the students and the staff that are going to be in our schools. Yes, we have reserves, and yes, I understand it takes time to collect the reserve money. I understand that completely, but no one expected a pandemic, and we need to ensure the safety of our staff and students and community.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Forbes?
Thank you, Chair Brainy. And I guess the thing that's striking me is, and as the parent of a child who is returning to in-class, back to class in September for her final grade 12 year, I would like her, as well as all of the students in Durham, to be safe, and all of our staff members to be safe. I guess I also am cognizant of, this is a 8.1 million is an up to. This is a range that we are, that the motion is addressing. It's not necessarily that 8.1 million would be necessary, but this is the wording that the government has provided us, that before we could ask for additional funds from them to access additional teachers, we would need to spend this out of our reserves, if indeed we did have 1% of our budget in reserves, and we do. I am an advocate for special education. I absolutely know that the government has underfunded special education consistently, not just for the last 2 years, I would say for as long as I've been aware of special education. And I know there are trustees on this board that have been lifting the burden of raising, the cause for special education far longer than me. So I'm proud of what this board has consistently done over the years. So I find myself, it takes my breath away to think about using those reserves that support, our special education funding, but recognizing that providing a safe environment in this pandemic is vitally important, and publicly drawing attention to this and calling on the government to correct this so we won't have to use our reserves, I think is a very important component to the motion. So I just wanted to I'm sorry, it's a statement. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Trustee Forbes. Trustee Crawford?
Well, it looks like we're into discussing the motion, and I think we're making the same mistake we've made in other meetings. We're trying to put too much into this. We're trying to build too much into a special meeting. I'm not even sure what staff thinks of this. I'm going to suggest, and this shouldn't be too much of a bad suggestion, that we postpone this for 2 days and set up as committee in 2 days, dealing with this motion only. It'll give us an opportunity to deal with the items and add to the items and make it an even better motion to send to the government, which is the main purpose of this. And by the way, when Trustee Edwards indicated that these should be dealt with individually, they must be dealt with individually as soon as any member asks for it to be done that way. So it could be a bit of a lengthy process. So I'm going to move that we postpone it to Wednesday evening.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford. So do you have a seconder for that? Or is there a seconder?
I don't think I need a seconder, but there is one.
Need it? I'm happy to second that motion if you need it.
Thank you, Trustee Thatcher. So on that motion, are there any speakers to that? Trustee Morton?
Thank you. Thank you. And through you, I think if we take a few extra days, that would be beneficial, because I would like to consider the results from the survey that's out there with our parents. I would like to know the percentage of our students who are choosing to have remote learning as opposed to in class. I think that's an important piece of information that we should have prior to making any major decision. So I would gladly support Paul's motion.
Okay, I'll also speak to it. I personally believe that time is of the essence, and we need to send a message out to the government and to try to do what we can to ensure that people get this message out and the news as soon as possible, so that they know what is expected and will be in place by the startup. I think we're running out of time, but I'll take other speakers too. Trustee Noble.
I would not be in favor of postponing this another 2 days. Even at 48 hours, I find it concerning. This is a huge issue that needs to be addressed immediately. 2 days from now would bring us to Wednesday the 12th, which I believe is 6 days after the modified elementary school calendar school started back, which was last Thursday, if I'm correct on that one. We already have students learning. We had summer students learning. I don't believe that we have the time to wait again. And I know I've said it before, and I will continue to say it again and again. We do not have time for trial and error when it comes to the lives and well-being of our staff and of our students. And I don't know what else to say to get this more across to anybody at this point, but we cannot wait. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 days. Today in Ontario, 149 COVID cases were announced. We don't know how many are going to be announced tomorrow. We do not know how many are going to be announced the next day. We do not have room to sit and wait for things to potentially get worse. We haven't hit a second wave. We might hit a second wave. We might not. And I do not want to be the person who's sitting here saying that we can wait and it's okay to wait even 2 more days. We are dealing with a global pandemic that does not have a cure right now. And I am not comfortable postponing this anymore. I believe we should vote on the motion tonight, and not just vote on it, but pass the motion to ensure the safety of our staff and of our students and of our communities. Thank you.
I'm going to take 2 more questions, and we're going to go to a vote on Trustee Crawford's motion and then Trustee Lundquist's motion. So Trustee Barnes. So I have Trustee Barnes and Trustee Lundquist. I'll let you finish that. Trustee Lundquist will be the last speaker. Go ahead, Trustee Barnes.
I think this is a very important time and very important issue. I have a student that's going back in grade 8 for September as well. So, you know, as a parent, my concerns are there, very much so. But I think that the motion is an important motion, and I think we should look at it thoroughly and make a decision, because the implications are not just for now. The implications are long-term, and we should take the time. And I know it's a very emotional issue, and I know trustees are very passionate about that, but it would be my decision would be to take 2 days to look at the motion and find out the ramifications before a decision is made.
Okay, Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. So I want to always be respectful of everybody's views around this table. I think that that's something that is vitally important to the functioning of this board. But I'm going to say this. Every trustee around this table has had the same opportunities to review the same documents that I have reviewed. Every trustee around this table has had the same opportunity to talk to parents and engage and listen to their concerns. And the motion for us right now is very specifically designed to address the documents that we've been provided with, the directions of the ministry, the views of parents. And I'm really struggling to understand why we want to walk this back. And the reason I'm struggling is because time is of the essence in this situation. Parents are being asked to make a decision in 2 days. They don't want to hear what we're going to do after those 2 days. They want to hear it now. Staff who have to go back into those classrooms want to know what those classrooms are going to look like. People can't make decisions with less information. The more information we provide them, the better off their decision-making capacity is. And so I understand the concern about the financial piece. I really genuinely do. But practically speaking, it is so clear to me in my own mind, and I'm not sure where the disconnect is, but it's so entirely clear to me that it is vital that we do whatever we can do to protect our students. To me, this is a reasonable middle ground. I'm not doing something like asking you to implement a cap size that isn't something that we have the power to do because we don't have the funding to do it. I'm asking you to consider using the funds we have available to us to do everything we can to protect the safety of the students and staff in the system, and that protects our community, our broader community. So to me, the information is already there. It is on the table. And yes, we will know more precisely how much of that potential $8 million we are going to need to access in order to appropriately do the minimum of what has been recommended. That's what I'm asking for in this motion is a minimum. I'm not asking for us to reach for the stars. I'm not saying let's cap class sizes regardless of space. I'm not saying let's ignore the ministry, which we can't do, and mask every student. I'm not suggesting that this motion is perfect. It's not. I would rather see caps. I would rather see 2 meters. This is a practical motion that is within the authority of the board to pass, but oh, my lights just went out at work. I don't know if you can see me or not, but it's within the authority of the board to pass, but more importantly, it's within our purview to pass because we have access to the funding that allows it to happen. Thank you.
Chair Brainy, can I just make a point in that the staff has presented a plan that tells us that at this time we have put in place a plan where we have that 1 meter distance that is required for our classrooms, unless I got that wrong from the information that was presented.
Through you, Chair Brainy, may I clarify?
Go ahead.
So I want to be really clear because this is an important one for our families and our staff. So what we have done is evaluated the size of the classroom and how many potentially students we could fit into a classroom based on 1 meter of distance. And what we wanted to then do is identify where we have challenges. We will have challenges. Some of our classrooms will be too small. And so that will be something that we felt we needed to be transparent about and identify both to you and to the staff and families impacted. So the plan has evaluated that 1 meter of spacing. It's identified that we would be provide information in terms of the classes where that is a problem, but we do not have a solution other than the potential little pot that might exist from efficiencies of staffing from the virtual school.
Okay, thank you.
I wouldn't call that a point of motion or a procedural scenario, Trustee Barnes. There is a speaker list. You know, we could have dealt with it through that. But anyways, I said that Trustee Lundquist would be, so let's vote on Trustee Crawford's motion.
Well, will I get to speak to that motion first?
Actually, since you're the one that moved it, Paul, I will give you the last word on that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, first, I'm a little bit insulted to think that somebody would say that I or other trustees don't study things. I can't even begin to tell you how many hours I put into studying things. I'm only suggesting that I'm not suggesting that this is a bad motion or a bad idea. I'm only suggesting that with a couple more days, we could perfect this motion so that we'll have even more effect. Not only that, but staff will have an opportunity to study this motion and maybe have some input into it to make it more effective. So the world is not going to fall apart in the next couple of days. And it's good that we're going to get back to the government. Even if the motion went through as it was right now, I would still vote for it because it's still better than, I'm not going to say better than nothing, but it's better than not saying anything. But give it a couple of days, perfect it, and give everybody an opportunity to put some input into it. I'd like to see 11 statements in there, one from each trustee as a suggestion. So it's a good idea. 48 hours is not going to kill the idea. So I urge you to postpone it till then.
Thank you, Trustee Crawford.
I realize that you said there were no more speakers, but I just, you know, the wonderful thing about democracy is that it really does take a lot more time. Would you mind very much if I made a comment?
Since you seconded the motion, Trustee Thatcher, feel free.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that as trustees, our responsibility is to ensure the safety and well-being of our students, and we all know that. And most definitely we'll be doing that as trustees. We have had parents, teachers reach out to us with many, many comments. We have also a very, in my opinion, a very sound plan in place that the Acting Director Marsh and her team have put together. I do, however, feel that 2 days is not a really long time to give us an opportunity to take a more detailed look at this motion, which was actually finalized just tonight. Sorry. And also the benefit of waiting a couple of days is that at that time, we'll have a whole lot more information to determine what our actual needs are. As a board and as a district, we have been very, very careful to base our decisions on data. We've taken a lot of time to pull information together. So I just want to say that I certainly don't see a lot of issues with this motion either. I would just suggest that we just take a little bit more time so that we can look it over with more detail. So that's all. Thanks so much, Chair Brainey.
Thank you. So then go to the vote on Trustee Crawford's motion to postpone this for a couple of days. Trustee Crawford moved, Trustee Thatcher seconded. All in favor? See one. Can people put the yes? You've got yes or no on your computer there. So I've got 5 yes and 4 no. I'm thinking of, I believe in that scenario, it would be a tie if I voted. Could I have Council Cotter? Actually, what's what occurs if there is a tie vote?
Sorry.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
If I may, Paul, if a majority of trustees or you know, a tie is what it is, I would rather speak to it in 2 days, because clearly people feel that they need the time to engage with the motion and more properly consider it. So I'm prepared to I don't know what the appropriate language is, so I could use help with that, but I am prepared to assent to us considering it in 2 days if there's some proper way of doing that.
Would we defer it?
Well, if I may, just a point of information, Mr. Chair, if you were to vote and it was tied, then the vote to postpone would lose.
Yes. But there's a 5-3. So, and I think also with what Trustee Lundquist just had to say, she also feels that if that's the will of even some on the board, that's probably what her wishes are too. So, that being said, that vote carries, so will be postponed for a couple of days. Any preference about times? Deal with Monday, so we'd be dealing with a Wednesday evening. Is that?
How about if the chair sets it?
I could, but
sorry.
So I'd like to go to Acting Director Marsh. How does that work for staff, Acting Director Marsh? If we were to do an evening, same time on Wednesday.
Through you, Chair, we could certainly make ourselves available for a special board meeting. I will note that the registration deadline for families is the 12th. And so I just want to make sure that the board is aware of that as a dynamic. We are very conscious of the amount of work we need to do once registration occurs to understand what the ripple effect is from a staffing and allocation perspective. So that's why we have been trying to preserve the 12th as the deadline. So I just want to make sure it's not a comment one way or another, but just wanted to make sure that the trustees were aware of that dynamic.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Lundquist.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with the mute. Is there any possibility of dealing with this in a morning meeting on Wednesday? Because that way, at least, we will have made a decision so that parents who are still contemplating whether we are actually going to implement appropriate safety measures will have a better sense of what our plan is. It gives them at least a little bit of time to make a decision with some information.
I'm certainly free to entertain a morning session on Wednesday.
I'm available.
So am I.
You just have a show of hands as who would be just yes. Just click on it, or actually, if you can, it's easier for me to read the screen if you just click yes for a morning meeting Wednesday.
10 a.m.
I think I'm fine to do it earlier. I would say 10 a.m. would probably be reasonable. And looks like a majority of people are in favor of that. So let's do this Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. We'll have this conversation again then.
Chair, I just wonder, will the staff even have more information as to registrations? I guess you'd have some numbers by them as well, right, Nora? It wouldn't be closed yet, but you'd have an idea of parental decision.
We could certainly update the board in terms of the number who have registered, but again, I want to make sure that we understand that we won't know. It will take us about a week to do the staffing and timetabling to understand then the ripple effect as far as what classroom structures look like. So we will have no further information in terms of any class sizes at that point.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move forward. Wednesday, 10 a.m.
Adjourn?
No, we have one other item, Paul, that we have to, our transportation report.
Oh, correct, yeah.
Do you want me to turn that over to you first, Acting Director Marsh, and then you introduce Kelly?
Excuse me, Chair. We still have questions regarding the first presentation.
Well, this is being deferred to Wednesday.
Could we address those questions? No, but I don't want to talk about the motion. I wanted to talk about other parts of the first presentation.
Well, wouldn't we discuss that on Wednesday? But wouldn't we discuss that on Wednesday since it's been deferred to that date? Why would we discuss it now?
We've deferred the motion. We haven't deferred the information package that we provided to parents tonight.
Could we work that into the transportation part?
I think Trustee Morton, you have questions about the first presentation. Would it tie
Yes,
in?
I do.
Would it tie into anything
They have nothing to do with either transportation or the motion that we were debating.
Okay, we seem to have lost a chair. I don't know if the vice chair wants to take a step in here.
I don't think it's improper for trustees to continue with their questions on the information package. That makes absolute sense to me. So if you have questions, Trustee Morton, I would advise you to go ahead.
Thank you. And my first question has to do with Brock High School. Brock High School is a very unique secondary school. They have 400 students. They have no COVID-19 in Brock. In fact, the maximum number that they've experienced in all of Brock was only 9 cases. So can we look at Brock High School different, perhaps attending more than the 30% of the day of the week? Those parents, those students are fighting for that.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Lindquist. Trustee Morton, we are aware of the desire of many Brock parents and students in terms of it would still be the same schedule, but it would be every day versus every second day. So protecting the cohort contacts by having the 150 minutes in person every day and then online for the afternoons. We did discuss that when the Ministry of Education had their meeting with Durham. We identified at that time that there were a few areas where we were hearing, in Brock in particular, because of the school size and the location. The Ministry of Education at this stage has not given us the approval to move forward in a differentiated manner between schools within the district. We also raised it in a provincial call with the Deputy Minister of Education and identified separately to her. So they are aware of it. I think that as they move forward, there is a potential for that flexibility, but at this stage, we have not yet received direction that we can change and differentiate for one high school within the district.
Perfect. As long as that's a consideration, I'm pleased. I have one more question, and that is regarding Rotary in elementary schools. So I know that we want to cut down on and have limited Rotary, but core French teachers are dealing with So instead of those core French Rotary teachers working with a cohort of 20 or 25 students, they will be working with 100, 150 students. Are we going to have a protocol in place for those Rotary teachers?
So in our timetabling at the school level, we are trying to minimize the number of Rotary teachers and for homeroom teachers to take on more responsibilities. However, we recognize based on qualifications that won't always be possible. And the Ministry of Education has identified when we're discussing cohorts that we are talking about the number of student contacts. And so the Rotary teacher will travel from classroom to classroom. We will, as much as possible, put in protective measures to ensure that that teacher feels comfortable going into the variety of classrooms that they will visit. And again, wherever possible, we will try to limit the number of Rotary teachers. So for example, we know we need to provide prep time for teachers. So potentially then the prep time when someone needs to be going in there anyway would be the core French, but that will vary from school to school depending on the flexibility and staffing that they have.
Thank you, Nora. I appreciate that consideration.
Hi, guys. I was just talking to Chris. He's just having some technical difficulties. So just continue. If that's the last question, Nikki, you can go ahead and run over. He's going to come back in. I just got to give him a quick call when we get close to the transportation. He's trying to charge his battery.
I don't see any other hands right now. I'd be happy to give the chair roll back to Chris when he comes back. But I do have one question because I've had several parents email while we were on this call, and they wanted to have an understanding of the modified schedule online. So for modified, I hope that's clear enough.
Through you, Chair Lindquist, I think what you're referencing is for those at secondary, is that the question, or elementary?
I think it's both. So it's virtual learning in the modified program. What does that look like?
Okay, so at secondary, the timetable is identical in terms of the blocks of learning. And we did it that way with quadmestering because while cohort exposure is not a concern, we did identify that we may get into a situation with staffing where we want staff to be able to teach in both, depending on how short we are in terms of qualifications. French is a classic example. We know there's a shortage of French teachers in Ontario as an example. So the schedule is the same, with one difference being that if you're in the virtual environment, you're not being divided into cohort A and B. And so it would be an everyday attendance. That would be the one difference between the two. Okay. At elementary, it is the schedule replicates the in-person schedule. Having said that, we recognize that for 4- and 5-year-olds, being in front of a computer, or depending on those younger ages, that being in front of the computer for the full instructional day is not a healthy amount of screen time. And so we would be looking to have throughout the day learning blocks and then opportunities for other sorts of play-based activities for students to be doing within their homes. Does that clarify sufficiently?
So the questions that I received were not detailed, so I'm going to accept that as an answer until parents email me back and let me know more, and then I may come back with more questions if that's okay.
Definitely.
Not today. Thank you. Do we have any other questions on this, or can we move to the next presentation? I see no hands, so we can move to the next item on the agenda, the I don't have it in front of me because I wasn't chairing the meeting, so the transportation piece.
Hi. Is it okay for me to go ahead, or?
It is absolutely okay for you to go ahead. Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't have an agenda in front of me because I became an involuntary chair of the meeting.
Say this is the CEO, so welcome. Really happy to have you here, and appreciate you providing this opportunity to the board as well as to our families and staff as far as the measures you're putting in for transportation of students. So we'll turn it over.
Thank you.
Should I just share my screen of the presentation? Is that okay, or?
I'm waiting for Tech to say so. Yes, Tech says yes.
Okay, let's just see. We can do that. Files. Okay, I may need some help with this. Just give me 1 second. Sorry.
No apologies necessary.
Doesn't want to share the doc. Heather, do you have it where you can bring it up on the screen? Mine just is saying it's blocked. It's not going to let me do it.
I wonder if we quickly email it to Robert and he can share his screen. We know that he has permissions from the earlier presentation.
Oh, sure. No problem. I can do that right now.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate the problem solving.
Okay, Robert, I've sent it over to Robert. I think I might be able to do it now. I don't know if you can see it.
We have it up.
You do?
We do.
Okay, look at that. All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I've lost control of my map.
Sorry, Kelly, you'll just have Rob control everything while you speak.
Oh,
to it, and Rob
okay,
will have to
maybe,
control the map.
okay, maybe that's why it shut it down. Okay. There we go. So I just put together a quick presentation just to give you an update on some of the transportation planning pieces for the upcoming school year. So if we just go to the next slide. So when we exited our offices and went remote from home, we started to do our route planning for the upcoming school year. So during March, April, May, we actually did route simulations just under normal operating conditions to just get started. We knew that there would be changes later, but it was just a pre-planning part to get ready, just to see what the routes were going to start to look like for the fall. That gave us our JK registrations, our French immersion registrations, and we simulated what we call a grade up, which means if a student's in grade 3, we grade them up to grade 4 to continue to route them into the new school year. So we did this waiting for our plan, and we got our plan in early August. And this is just some high level pieces that we're using to start the routing. So for the elementary, it's a 6-hour and 30-minute day. For the secondary, it's a 2-hour and 30-minute day. As you know, the secondary are in a cohort model, so they will be attending alternate days. But the way that we're doing the routing is we're doing one route for the week, and then we'll split the students into cohorts on that route to try to keep it as continuous as possible from Monday to Friday for the routing. We're starting to do this plan, hoping that this will be the routing for the year, but we know that there may be changes mid-year from the ministry, but for now, that's how we've set it up. When it comes to loading on the buses, we're loading 2 students per seat. On a large vehicle, that's a maximum capacity of approximately 48 students. It's actually less than that because the seat behind the driver will be vacant. And a lot of the 70 passenger models only seat 1 student at the back of the bus. So it's probably closer to about 44 students on a large vehicle. For the smaller vehicles, again, it will be the vehicle seat configuration. The 18 passengers come in many different variations, but again, it will be 2 per seat on the smaller buses as well, keeping the seat behind the driver vacant. There'll be a seating plan assigned for each route and each tier on the vehicles. We're numbering the seats, so all of the students will be assigned a seat number. That will be their seat number for the year. That seating plan will be done electronically. It will be shared with the school for review. If they need to make changes, they can do those changes, but we will be setting the first seating plan. The ministry would like to have those seating plans in place for the first day of school, if at all possible. And again, we'll be routing the students on a weekly bus route schedule, so the students will be assigned the same seat on that vehicle weekly. For the special education classes, the secondary students in the developmental class, the PLP and the SLC, they'll be attending full days weekly, and it'll be a planned 6-hour day. The elementary special education classes will be routed similar to the larger elementary buses with a 6-hour and 30-minute day. We may have to stagger the arrival and dismissal, and that's really just due to capacity limitations at some of the schools. And then we just don't really have transportation available for a customized reduced day schedule. It would be a regular planned day, and that's how the busing would be running in the AM and the PM. So we did do a survey out to our parents. The transportation survey went live early last week. And what we asked parents to do was just to confirm for us the need for transportation, but to also give us updated addresses, caregiver information, whether they needed the bus just in the AM or they needed the bus in the AM and the PM. So far, we have about 6,500 submissions, and we did do a reminder call over the weekend, so we probably had more submissions today and maybe a few more tomorrow as well. And they all got automated calls to let them know about the survey. So as outlined in the Ministry of Education directives, they spoke to having all bus drivers wear medical grade masks and face shields at the very least at the time of boarding and deboarding of the student. They can wear the face shield during the entire route if they choose. It's just they have to ensure that they can still safely operate the vehicle with the face shield in place. Some of the drivers may need additional PPE, and we'll be working with the special education department to determine those PPE needs. The needs may be gloves, gowns, just anywhere that a bus driver may be in close proximity or close contact with the student, the additional PPE may be required. We've been working with the bus operators over the last few months to ensure that they all have COVID procedures in place and that they do have supplementary training for all of their staff and bus drivers with respect to COVID, how to self-identify whether they have any symptoms, but also what to do in the case of social distancing, ensuring that students are wearing their masks, and how they're going to deal with the bus behavior as well. This is sort of a new level of complexity for the school bus. The school buses themselves will receive a full cleaning twice per day. That's all high touch surfaces, but it's not limited to. So I've listed everything here, but pretty much it's the entire vehicle that will be fully cleaned twice per day. Due to the limitations of social distancing on the bus, all students will be required to wear a non-medical mask while on the vehicle. We ask that they sanitize their hands before boarding and sanitize once they're at school. Hand sanitizer will be available on all school buses as well. And we will also ensure that we have temporary masks available if a student forgets a mask, they break the mask while on the bus, that those will be available as well. So we're also working with the communications departments of both boards to provide some messaging in the form of posters, as well as an informational video. I've got the poster on the next page. The information informational video. We should be filming that this week. So it's really just a training video. We'll host that on our website, do a promotional campaign about the video, and as well, we'll make sure that it's available on both school boards' websites as well. So this is what we've developed with the communications department to put on all the school buses. Just a reminder about some extra things that the students need to do while on the bus and before they get on the bus. So it's wear your mask, sit in the seat that's assigned to you, make sure that you take all your belongings with you, clean your hands, and if you're sick, make sure you stay home. We are expecting that some of the bell times may shift and that there will likely be some additional traffic around the school sites as parents maybe are at home and they choose to drive their student in the morning or pick them up in the afternoon. But also due to the limited capacity on the school buses, we expect that there'll also be more school bus vehicles heading into school sites. So instead of 4 buses, there might be 6, and there might be extra traffic as well. And because we're going to be tiered so tightly between school sites, we've asked that the parking lots and the kiss and rides just be closed for 15 minutes prior to the bell to allow the school buses priority to get in, unload the students, and then get back out of the site. They can take the pylons off of the driveway and then allow the traffic in after the school buses have exited. We've been having weekly meetings with our operators, and the operators have also been reaching out to all of their staff weekly. They've been doing personal calls to every bus driver and every staff member just to have contact, make sure everything's going okay, and of course to ask whether they're returning in September. We are anticipating that we may have some driver retention issues. We are lowering the fleet that we will execute in the fall to take into account that some drivers may at the last minute decide not to return. They may have family commitments, or they may have some medical issues where they feel that they can't come back. So we're working with the operators to ensure that we do have drivers assigned to every route that we plan over the next few weeks. So with the capacity limitations, we have had to reroute all of the vehicles. The transportation survey will help us to determine who does need transportation and also from what address they need that transportation. We're hoping to be able to communicate any bell time changes by the week of August 24th. And also have the secondary cohort information so that the schools can start putting together the classes at the secondary level. The bell time changes themselves will work with the communications department to ensure that all of that information is messaged out to the parents and to school administration. We also do need to inform the municipalities as well as Durham Region Transit. The municipalities are the ones that employ the crossing guards, so any bell time change that we do may impact the hours that the crossing guard is required. And for Durham Region Transit, those bell times are important because we do have many secondary students who take transit to and from the school sites. With the 2.5-hour day, the plan, and it just naturally fits, is to have the secondary be the last tier in the AM and to be the first tier for pickup in the PM. So we would be delivering them after the elementary schools. And once all of the routing is done, we'll just do our regular startup process, which is really just going live on our parent portal, which is available on our website, and our automated phone line. So parents are able to call in on a 24-hour automated phone line and receive their routing information, or they can sign up to the parent portal and get that information through the website. That's about all I had for what we're doing in transportation.
Thank you for your presentation, trustees. Do we have questions? I see Trustee Edwards with her hand up, so we'll start there.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. One, the federal guidelines for bus operators basically say that you should respect a 2-meter distance. The seating 2 per seat is not respecting the 2-meter distance. I recognize that they will all be wearing masks, but even the sick kid says 1 meter distance. Can you tell me how close they're actually sitting?
So we'll be loading the students assigned seats, but they'll be loaded by grades. So it'll be the kindergartens, the grade 1 sitting at the front of the bus, the middle grades in the middle of the bus, and then the 7s and 8s at the back of the bus. So the idea is to almost place the students by grade in their class cohorts.
Yes, but they will be closer than 1 meter.
Yes, they will be if they're sitting together on the same seat bench. Yes.
All right. And then are you, because I know that particularly in Ajax, but because we used to have 3 tiers, busing timing is really critical. And one delay affects the other, especially in inclement weather. I'm just wondering, is the 75 minutes, can you guarantee the 75 minutes that a student will be able to go from their in-class or secondary students to their online, plus to have their lunch? And because some of those students will also be taking Durham Transit.
So with the tiers that we're doing in the AM and the PM, the tiers really won't be in high commuter traffic periods. And in the South, where there's not that much travel distance, I think that we will be fine with getting the students home within that 60-minute period. Up in the North, there may be, just due to kilometers and travel time, that may be more of a challenge for us. And that's the very tippy top of the region. But here in the southern part, where the distance between the school and the student's residence is quite confined, we should be fine.
And again, that should be fine, but I'm looking at inclement weather, because God forbid this should go on until the winter, which it might, I can see it happening, where a bus was, a drive is supposed to be 45 minutes and ends up being an hour and 10 minutes.
We plan for regular weather conditions. So you are correct. There could be a bad accident on the highway, or there could be significant weather issues that are beyond the control of the route planning.
And what type of supports are you going to put in that place? Because I'm looking at tracking and monitoring, because there's a very common, even right now, it's very common for a student to not appear on the bus in the morning, but will take the ride back in the afternoon. So I'm just wondering what type and how quick are we going to get that type of reporting when it comes to tracing and so forth, and where do you report that?
So my understanding is that we would work through the schools, and that type of reporting would go into the public health department. And that's why it's important that we have a seating plan in place, that we would be able to provide that to them to show where the students had the assigned seats on the bus.
And when you talk about 48 on a bus, does that include staffing? Because we can see the possible increase of staffing required for monitoring of students who have had difficulty with the changes, etc. Does that 48 include staff or not?
So in our system, we route an EA almost like a student. So if an EA is on a bus or assigned to a bus, whether it be a small bus or a big bus, they're assigned a seat on that bus as well. So it would be 2 per seat, and the EA would have one of those seats.
Okay, and then the last question is around stops. Are you limiting the number of students at a particular stop for distancing, etc., in order and maybe changing stops because of that?
So the stops themselves, no, but by capacity, it's going to dictate how many students are at the stop for the bus route. If we see stops that are an entire bus load, we're going to make changes to that. It's just too many. It likely means that we would bring 2 buses into that neighborhood and split the load.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chair Brainy has joined us. He's been able to get back on, so I'm going to turn it back over to him, but I'm just going to advise him that the speaking order was Ashley, Patrice, Paul, and Carolyn.
Perfect. Thanks for letting me know that, Trustee Lundquist, and my apologies. I lost my Wi-Fi connection and was finally able to pick another spot, so it worked out. So our first on the list is, see here, we've got Trustee Noble.
Thank you. And I guess this question may end up going to inclusive services at the end, but I am just wondering, I know that a lot of our students in special education have specialized trips that they take on the buses. Alongside many students have their EAs that may ride with them, and some students do require a seat to themselves completely. Is that being factored in? And in the event that it is, how does that change the numbers?
So as you know, for special education, almost every transportation plan is customized to the student's needs. So if that student requires a certain perimeter of space, we likely have that noted in their transportation plan already. We would have done that last year, and we would continue with that this year. So if it means an EA, it means additional space. We have some students that must ride by themselves. We would still make those route planning or those arrangements for those students.
Thank you, Trustee Noble. Trustee Moore.
Question in regards to when we're cohorting, are we gonna give consideration to keeping family members together in that cohorting when we're doing that on the bus? And the other question is in regards to the very real possibility of increased traffic around schools. Are we going to have any additional staffing or protocols in place to help with that?
So I can answer the cohort question. So that's part of the reason why we asked for the transportation survey, and it actually asks parents to list all students in the household and whether they need transportation for those students. What we want to gather is, I mean, we can take the alphabetical list and we can split the alpha, but we do know that sometimes students have different names in the household. So we wanted to be able to capture that as well. So that's part of what the transportation survey will do for us. And yes, the intention is that we would, if it were a cohort situation, that all of the students would be transported from the same household together. Except if they go to different schools, and then they may be on different bus routes.
Trustee Morton.
Sorry, I had the other question, Chris, which was, are we staffing for that additional traffic that where parents are going to choose to drive their students in the morning?
I may give that one to Heather. My understanding was that that would be managed or worked through with school administration at each school site. We already have some school sites that have some high traffic at certain points of the day. And so school administration has always dealt with some of the traffic issues around their school sites. But maybe Heather could provide additional information if you need it.
Through you, Chair. I think that potentially what we could do is begin with Associate Director Kisco, because I know this has been a topic of conversation in the return to school document, and then perhaps Superintendent Mundy can add to that.
Thank you, Director Marsh. With respect to, this is a conversation around supervision. And it has certainly been noted that the school site, traffic on school sites will require supervision on site. And so we're looking at, in fact, other staff that could provide that supervision. They would include, for example, if we are increasing our number of lunchroom supervisors, there may be an opportunity to shift timelines a little bit so that we, in fact, have the benefit of having supervision carried by some of those individuals to support the schools. So it's about, it again is a supervision question. And again, I think it's still one of those that has to be figured out site to site, school to school.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think we will look at each site individually and review, what the supervision requirements are and how we can best ensure a safe arrival for all of our students.
Thank you.
Any further questions, Trustee Barnes? Okay, Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Brady. I have 3 questions. Firstly, I'm just wondering, we're going to have the seating on the bus with primary at the front, junior in the middle, and intermediate sitting at the back. Would it not be safer to have siblings seated together?
We were going to do it by grade to try to have it by grade cohort. But the initial seating plan that's done by DSTS, a copy of that will go into school administration. They have the flexibility to make those changes and they could sit siblings together. But the original plan would be to have the grades sit together. We also recognize that sometimes siblings don't want to sit together.
Yeah.
So we would leave that up to the school administration, who knows the students the best, to make those changes on the seating plan.
Right. Thank you for that consideration. A second question, we know that we're going to have a lot of parents choosing to drop their children off at school as opposed to taking the bus. But some of our schools do not have the kiss and ride. How are we going to deal with that?
Through you, Chair. So one of the things we've talked about in the school return to school planning is, in fact, that that we're limiting access to that area other than children who have special education needs and their families for individual drop-off because of the volume and also because of the staggered bus arrivals. So I'm not sure who wishes to speak to it further, but what I can tell you is we have flagged for parents not to expect to be able to drive up and through, but in fact to park and walk their children the final part to the school, anticipating that there will be a number of families choosing to drive. Superintendent Mundy, would you like to add to that?
Yes, just to add that we will look at additional communication out to the system to inform our parents so they're aware of that. And also look, as we look at staggered arrival and pieces too, maybe something for consideration depending on the school site.
Thank you. I have one last question, and that question has to do with bus runs. We know that some buses have 2 tiers, maybe even 3 tiers, but the bus cleaning takes place twice a day. Can we explain how we're going to maintain a healthy clean in tier 2?
So you're correct. The cleaning will be twice a day in between runs because the time is limited. The cleaning will consist of the handrail, which is the high touch area, and the backs of the seats that the students use to balance themselves as they get on and off the bus. One of the other protocols is to ensure that the students do hand sanitize before they get on the bus. And hand sanitizer will be available on the vehicle as well to try to increase the sanitization of the hands. But yes, a full cleaning would be twice a day.
Okay, but we need to be cognizant of other protocols that we may need to put in place.
Potentially, yes. I think that's where the seating plan is important too for each one of the tiers. They'd be able to identify who sat in 22 for any of the tiers. If that's what they're trying to do from a contact tracing perspective, they would know who those students were and which students boarded after the student who maybe has a suspected case.
Perfect. Thank you for those considerations.
Have Trustee Crawford, Edwards, Lundquist, and Barnes. Go ahead, Trustee Crawford.
Thank you. I'm just beginning to think that transportation might be more dangerous than being at school. They're so close together. Who's responsible for the children as soon as they get on the bus? Can I assume that it's us?
From a responsibility perspective, when the student gets on the vehicle, they are the responsibility firstly of the bus driver, but yes, they become the responsibility of the school board. The bus is an extension of the classroom.
And so it wouldn't matter if they got sick there or got sick at school, it's the same responsibility, which leads me to a question, and maybe it escaped me, but it seems so obvious. And this might not be a transportation question, but it grows out of that. Who's going to be testing the children to see if there's any events taking place?
For you, Chair Brainey. So are you referencing a COVID-19 test, Trustee Crawford?
Well, we're going to have to test the children to determine if this system is working or not. Yes, I am.
So in terms of a COVID-19 test, that would be conducted through a health professional. It wouldn't be conducted by any of our staff. We do know that the Ministry of Education has hired or is going in the process of hiring, I believe it's 500 additional health unit nurses that will be assigned regionally. We do not have any information in terms of Durham's plan yet as to how they'll allocate those nurse professionals, but we understand that part of that process is ensuring that we have very active testing so that if there are any cases at any point, we're aware of them very quickly, is my understanding.
Will that be full testing or sampling?
No, it would be for suspected cases. I do not believe there's any protocol for sampling testing randomly to determine if there's any COVID-19 amongst the students.
Well, isn't there COVID-19 that doesn't have any symptoms?
My understanding is that some people do not demonstrate symptoms. I'm very sensitive to starting to weigh into an area beyond my expertise as an educator.
Let's just set it aside as a question to be answered later, okay? I'm satisfied with that.
Trustee Edwards.
Just a couple of questions around Kiss and Ride. Many of the Kiss and Rides have been monitored by volunteers. Parents have been involved. So based on this, I'm assuming that we're not going to have parents involved in Kiss and Ride or those volunteers.
So through you, Chair Brainy, as much as possible, what we're looking for is parents to park the car somewhere safely and walk the child the remaining area to the school. There will be exceptions made on a case-by-case basis where that proves to be a challenge for the family. And there will be certain times that it is still available, but we recognize with the staggered busing that it's going to complicate the drop-off period. And I'm not sure if either associate director wants to add more in terms of the work they did on the return to work or return to school document in terms of this particular issue.
Nothing further to add from my end. Nora, thank you.
I think needs some clarification. There was actually parents that actually stood in the Kiss and Ride, opened the door for the students so that the parents could drive away. So they were actually doing that type of stuff because there was not enough staff and monitoring to do that. So there was actually, usually it's SEC members or whatever, but they would actually stand, open up the door, and it was just to ensure the flow because there were parents that parked in the Kiss and Ride, but actually would open the door, kid got out and said, bye parent, and the parent would leave. So I'm just wondering, as far as the actual running the Kiss and Ride, are parents going to be, or those volunteers going to be able to be utilized or not?
So through you, Chair, Trustee Edwards, it may be a bit premature for us to say what that will look like from school to school, depending on the volume and the particular scenario in terms of street parking. So I think we would have to have a flexible approach based on a variety of criteria. But as much as possible, one of the things that we do know is that we're attempting to mitigate risk through the number of individuals involved in the school site. So as an example, we're asking that parents not come into the school physically at this point unless they have a predetermined appointment. And in those instances, we're asking as much as possible that happen via virtually or on the telephone, because what we're trying to do as much as possible is to keep it stable in terms of the number of people who are at the school site. So I think it would depend on the nature of the situation. And I believe that and one of the associate directors can correct me, but I believe that there was contact, or perhaps Superintendent Mundy, with the municipality to also flag in terms of the volume of traffic that we're anticipating around school sites.
That was going to be my next question is around coordination with municipalities, because that is currently around some of our schools. We have problems with parents parking in the streets, and we've had complaints. Bylaw officers are very few and far between, and you might be able to get one in at some point in time. So there's that coordination. I'm just wondering, have we done anything like working with them to do a campaign or et cetera, so that we promote, again, walking to school as much as possible, or riding a bicycle, et cetera? And those are the other questions. If we have bicycles, are we going to be cleaning bicycle stands if everybody's going to be putting them in those bicycles? Because I know a lot of them use it.
So I was just going to speak to, we are starting to look at, we know which schools have high traffic volume and are a concern. So working with facilities, we'll start to look at that in terms of planning with school principals, and also looking at a communication plan, working with DSTS and the communication departments to promote parents in terms of walking to school, where they can, how they can access the school without adding to the traffic volume at the entrance.
Okay. And my last question is more around, again, coordination. We talked about possible bell time changes. And I know the last time we had bell time changes, Durham Region Transit wasn't happy because they said they weren't notified. And I'm not saying that that wasn't done or not, but it was a comment. And so they couldn't change bus routes, et cetera, in time. So I'm just wondering what type of coordination we have with Durham Region Transit to ensure that our students will be able to get to their high school in time.
So I had a meeting with Durham Region Transit on Friday, and I let them know about the potential bell time changes. And I told them as soon as we had them ready to go to be launched through the board, we would be sending them to all of the municipalities, and we would also be sending them to Durham Region Transit as soon as they are available.
One last question, because this is a real issue right now. Right now, the only place, if you're looking at high school students and if they're going every other day, the bus pass is not feasible. It just doesn't count for the number of rides in it. And I knew they had a promotion on where you could save $20, but that has, I think, ended basically now. So the only way they're accepting now is the Metro passes, the cards, and they will, and there's only one place now to get them, and that is particularly at the GO stations is the most common place in most municipalities, and they charge for that as well. Has there any been discussion with Durham Region Transit around providing those Metro passes for the blank, the blank ones that you fill up for either a bulk rate or something, or something cheaper because they have to go that route?
I would have to take that feedback back to them. It's Durham Region Transit that does set and they're approved through Durham Region that sets the fares, but I can certainly take that feedback to them. I did ask them to see what type of messaging that they could put out specifically for secondary students. They took that as a takeaway on Friday. I just want to make sure that also secondary students are aware, for example, that all of the fares are contactless right now, and that, we're encouraging students to wear masks on Durham Region Transit as well, information like that. And so they took that as a takeaway on Friday, but I will be meeting with them again shortly, and I can certainly give them that feedback as well.
Any further questions, Trustee Edwards? Trustee Lundquist?
Thank you. I have two questions, I think, in one comment. The first one is just a clarification. I've received a couple of notes from parents. I think I know the answer. I would just like you to confirm that it's right. There will be mandatory masking for kids on the bus from SK to 3, not just 4 to 8.
Yes, yes,
okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm just going to say I'm a little concerned about the schools where there is a significant proportion of the student body that are being bussed in, like Julie Payette, and how that's going to work in terms of bodies coming in and off in a safe way. So I'm hopeful that we're turning our minds to that, because there are I think it seems like dozens of buses that go in there every morning. And to me, there is going to be a bottleneck of kids if we're not really cautious about staggering those entry times into that parking area for buses.
There's about 16 buses that go into Julie Payette, but the loads are around 50 or so. The loads actually aren't too bad for us to tweak the loads on the buses going into Payette. So we probably won't see too many more buses in there. We'll just have to pull some of the loads off to pare down from the 50. I think that's about the average at Julie Payette. So you'll, at very most, I think you'll probably only see 2, maybe 3 more buses in there. But we already phase into Julie Payette. We do phases of buses in. So one phase goes in, and then we phase in another set of buses because the actual loading and unloading zone can't handle all 16 buses at once.
Well, thank goodness, because you shouldn't have 700 kids all congregated in a small area. So the very idea that we phase in is great, but we're going to need to phase in more carefully, I think, in light of the way that children move off those buses. So I'm just going to flag that as something that needs to be considered in all of this. And then the final thing I'm going to say is I am alarmed by this plan, like genuinely alarmed by it. The very idea that we would put kids side by side, maybe masked, you know, I know they're supposed to be, but adults can't seem to manage to wear masks over their nose. So I anticipate there are going to be some issues with children too. And we're going to put them on buses side by side. And I can't even believe that that accords with the expectations of public health. So what I am going to ask of the board is that we get an opinion from the Durham Public Health Department on this plan, because I would not feel comfortable putting my child on a bus in this situation.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for that update. And we'll then move on to adjournment. Somebody move adjournment. Trustee Edwards, seconded by Trustee Noble. All in favor? Carries. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Donna, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Can you give me a call tomorrow about the busing thing? You have better sense of some of this than I do, and I would just like to